Welcome back to Jay's Smokehouse. I have a really special guest here for you, Ariana Ayu.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here, Jay. It's quite a pleasure. I am the lead educator and founder and creator of the CannyNurse Certificate Program. So what I do is I educate nurses. I have a program that I created it's the first program ever designed exclusively for working nurses. So nurses from LPNs all the way up through PhDs have taken my course, are encouraged to participate in my course. And essentially what I'm trying to do is to educate all the nurses who are out in the workforce, which, as you can imagine, is really a huge job and very, very important. So that's kind of that's why you have me on the show, right? You know these things, but for the audience,
can you tell the audience really quick why it's so important? Because the endocannabinoid system, how many nurses even know what that is?
Oh my gosh. I would hate to estimate how many nurses actually know. I would hate to estimate how many medical professionals. I think we're coming to a point where it is becoming more common knowledge. And it's really easy when you're in this industry to forget how many people don't know about it. But the endocannabinoid system is the master regulatory system of our whole body, which I think is amazing. It is the system that regulates everything else that we have. And so one of the things that my nurses always say when they get started in the program is, how can there be a whole new system that I've never heard of before? And it's understandable with our traditional body systems. If you think about your skeletal system, your circulatory system, even your hormones are something that we can find them, we can see them. If back in the olden days, so I went to grad school at Edinburgh University, which was one of the first medical schools in the world. And one of the famous stories of Edinburgh University is about Burke and Hare. And Burke and Hare were these body snatchers, and they became famous because they were caught. But the thing is that back in the early days of medical school, they didn't really know. I mean, there were a lot of theories about how the body works. There were lots of things that people had observed. But in order to discover these other body systems that we have, they would cut into dead bodies. And so Burke and Hare were famous because I believe they started out as grave robbers. They didn't start out as grave robbers. The story goes that one of them was in a boarding house and somebody died. And they knew that you can sell dead bodies to the medical school. And so if you're hanging out, you don't have a job, you don't have anything else to do, and this dead body of somebody who has no friends and family was a traveler passing through, it was sort of low-hanging fruit for them. So they took the body to the medical school, they made some money. So then they started robbing graves. But grave robbing apparently it was pretty big business. So some of the graveyards in Edinburgh had these big towers where people would sit and you could pay somebody to watch the graveyard, and so they would watch to make sure nobody was digging you up or getting your things. But this was back in the Victorian times. And so it was also the times when, the saying about for whom the bell tolls. Well, one of the things about the tolls is they were afraid that they'd be buried alive. So that was another reason. Because they didn't know if they were dead. And so if the theory was, and because grave robbers, they found out, they saw some coffins with, claw marks. And so they would attach a string. And so you'd pull on the string if you found yourself buried alive, and it would be connected to a bell up in the graveyard. And so, hopefully somebody would hear that and you'd be rescued. So grave robbing, not as easy as Burke and Hare thought it might be. So what they realized was easy was just, basically creating their own corpses. And so they would take these corpses to the medical school. And so what would happen, not just with those corpses, but other people who donated their bodies is, they'd cut into the body, they'd do an autopsy and they'd pull out the organs and they'd look at them. And so that's how a lot of our Western medical theory, that's where it came from cutting into the body. So you can see the bones, you can see the muscles, you can see the organs. But our endocannabinoid system, the reason that they didn't find it back then is because it's a chemical signaling system. So basically, it's all of these chemicals and receptors. So you have these, they call them cannabinoids because they're chemicals that mimic the chemicals that are in the cannabis plant. The system was developed, was discovered because they were looking for, well, how does THC, this active ingredient in cannabis, how does it make people high? What is it doing? Mm-hmm. And so it was this idea that you had a key. So we know it's doing something. We've got this key right here. There's got to be a lock that it's fitting in the body. And so that's how they discovered the endocannabinoid system. And I imagine that when it was first developed, it was kind of thought of as a little thing. I mean, and technically it is a little thing. You know, there you have these chemicals, these cannabinoids, these little fats that work on our body. And then you have the receptors. And then you have these enzymes that are the cleanup crew. So it's all a chemical system. So that's why most medical people who have gone through, I would say probably in the last, even now, teaching of the endocannabinoid system is not, it's not as widespread as it should be. But so all of these people who've been trained in Western medicine, they're going on information that was learned based on things that we could see. And so as technology got better, we became able to discover more things. And so this chemical signaling system it's so subtle, it's so tiny, it's so hard to find that we're still learning more and more about it. But it controls everything else. I always think of it as like a symphony conductor, or if you think about somebody who's a sound engineer, and if you've ever seen pictures, they have this whole area spread out in front of them with all these little knobs and dials and buttons, and so they're adjusting all of these different things to make a beautiful piece of music. And most of us can't even hear all of those different things that the sound engineer is listening to. And so, but the sound engineer with a really good ear, and also with the technology to be able to make something louder or softer, is able to manage all of the instruments, even in a whole orchestra. And so we have this incredibly beautiful system that governs everything else. Every single other system is regulated by the endocannabinoid system, but we just didn't have the technology before. We didn't have the awareness. We couldn't find it. And so now that we have, science is moving a lot faster and it's picking up and it's accelerating. But I mean, it's so important that we understand this because it's the master regulatory system. And not only that, but it's also important that we understand it because cannabis is becoming incredibly widespread. It's a lot of times they refer to it as the people's plant. And so all of these people are using cannabis, and it is a wonderful healer. Cannabis it's one of my favorite plants. And I mean, there are a lot of plants that I like. You know, I've been known to hug a tree or two, but there's so many people using cannabis, and I think it's actually criminal to ignore it at this point. But I mean,
and what kills me is there's so much more to cannabis. And so people always only see it as this drug that people use to get high. And I'm just like, there's so much more to cannabis. I mean, that's the great thing about cannabis as opposed to using a tree. Now, I'm not originally what you would call a tree hugger. I'm not what you would call like an environmentalist. But the more that I learn about how efficient cannabis can be as opposed to trees, I'm just like, let's just look at it. It makes sense. I mean, a tree, the fastest tree, 20 years to be able to harvest once it gets to maturity, typically 80 years. It's 20 to 80 years depending on the tree. Cannabis is 4 months, and it can be regrown almost immediately. And it can be regrown above the ground. It can be grown in the ground. You don't have to. It's so amazing what cannabis can do. And then the hempcrete, all the different applications you can use with cannabis, and yet not take away from another part. So you use flower for one, then you can separate flower if you want, and then use waxes for things. You can use all these different. That's another thing is waxes. When I drained my So when you do extractions and you do a winterization and a drain, have you ever heard about
No,
this?
please tell me.
Okay, so when you're extracting do you like extractions?
I think so. I think it is amazing that we can create so many different things from one place. So do I like extractions in general? I think it's pretty cool. I think it depends.
Is your issue that you take away so much when you do extractions?
So I am sort of a hippie at heart, right? So I do very much believe in whole plant, but I think that there are times that there are so many different times that we can use things in different ways. So I tend not to be sort of blanket pro or con anything. Really, I'm interested in what works. And so I think sometimes extractions are useful. And when you think about it, like if you create a cannabis oil, that's an extraction right there. So am I a fan of using noxious chemicals that might not come all the way out of something? That concerns me.
I see what you're saying. Yep.
And oil is an extraction. So, it's a big word.
I'm sure that you've heard, and I'm pretty sure I told you, I'm a prior extraction manager myself. And that's the world that I come from, which is interesting for me to kind of transition into this world. Coming from, like, I don't believe in all that. It's just THC. I just want to take THC and create THC. Who cares about CBD? Let's turn it into Delta 8. That's where I come from. And so I know about the damaging effects of all the extractions, which is why when I tell people, if you're going to do extractions, I actually like extracting right into fat. I think it's a really great and efficient way. You just like butter. You just do it. It takes a long time. It's a more grueling process, but I've had some of the best extractions from that. And I just think it's more natural. You get to preserve as much as you can. The second way I would say is ethanol. If you're going to do extractions, ethanol preserves as much as you can without damaging all the others. Yeah. Now, what I would do is we would do draining, filtering it. And so we would get a batch and we would be worried that we'd have mold in it. And sure, the ethanol should kill all the mold, but in the back of your mind, you're just like, you don't want mold spores being in your cannabis. So you find out that mold spores are typically 5 micron big. And so you get a 3 micron filter, you winterize your product and it freezes all the salt of all the waxes in your ethanol, and you get it to -40 Celsius, and then you drain it. Through that 3 micron, you're catching all those waxes and with it, all those mold spores. And so you just feel like you have a cleaner product. You can say, I have a mold-free product. But when you're done, you have that filter and all those waxes on top of it. And man, do they feel amazing. And I don't know, they probably have no medicinal value, but I was just sitting there. I was just like, I'd want to rub it on my skin. It was so amazingly smooth and wonderful. I was like, I wonder if there could be a market just for people wanting to use this as like a facial mud or something like that. I don't know if it could add anything, but man, did it feel good. And so there's just so much that you can find. You can separate it. A lot of people like to get rid of the chlorophyll, which I think is unfortunate, but you get people who want that color. I want gold. I don't want green. And I'm just like, well, your chloroform actually has an effect. And I see such a synergy with everything, and it's all put in that plant specifically for a reason in our bodies where it works with us. That's where I like preserving as much as I can. And so I like doing I like the idea of doing a vaporizer, and I've thought about moving more into vaporizers, just never have yet. I used to be a smoker, and so I love getting that feel. I stopped smoking cigarettes, and I Jones for them so much. And so smoking straight flower kind of helps alleviate that feeling.
Yeah. I mean, there's something about if you're someone who has associations of cannabis with smoking, right? I mean, when back in the olden days, when I was in college, that was the first time I ever tried pot, right? And I was like, I was smoking weed. Like, that was what we called it. And I didn't do it a lot, and I never bought any because I was always too afraid. But like, if somebody had some, I was happy to share. And it didn't happen often because I went to school for music and we were all vocalists. And so, but but there is this association that I have from my past of, you know, sitting around smoking, and it's a social thing too. There's that camaraderie. And so there's something like they're good memories, you know, like when I think about being young and doing stupid things, like I think about alcohol, right? When I was 21, we did some stupid things when we were drinking. And, you know, but when it came to cannabis, it was always, there were always good memories of sitting around, like enjoying people's company. And so I think there's also that, like, I don't know, I'm very sensitive. So mostly I use a vaporizer and I use oils, but you know, it's nice sometimes. But if I'm going to smoke, I want a water pipe. Like give me a nice, beautiful, I have some beautiful bongs. There's a woman, mybudvase.com, and she does these really beautiful, they're like, mine is, it's in a different room, but like you'll have it's a beautiful piece of glass. This is just a water bottle that, you know, was different, but it's like, but they're beautiful. And I don't know. I think for some people, like I was amazed when I first learned that smoking cannabis didn't cause lung cancer. I was like, what? Like that was I don't know about you, but that was one of my like early, most shocking things that I learned about cannabis. What do you remember? Something like that?
It was for me. So I did not know that for a long time. And then I found out now I think it's more THCA than THC, but it has the possibility to like attack cancerous cells in certain cancers. And so that's where I was like, I wonder if smoking cannabis kind of protected me from my 20 years of smoking cigarettes. But I know I have no idea. That's just something that kind of popped into my head when it happened. I was just like, that is amazing. Now, I do not like the carcinogens that you can still get from it. Maybe that's not the word. Maybe
they always
it's
call the
what
toxic byproducts of combustion. That's the official term in nursing.
Okay.
It's the toxic byproduct.
That resinous material you get at your bong or your bowl. I just see that and I'm like, I know that it won't cause that, but I just see that. And like, I haven't smoked cigarettes in 2 years. I think now I quit doing these videos. I have a video when I was Jones and I was just going, oh gosh, in that video, but I have it all recorded. But yeah, I still, somebody said 7 months and you'll never want a cigarette again. Bullshit. I wanted a cigarette yesterday and I was just sitting there going like this. Sometimes my anxiety just gets me. I just want that cigarette. And that's where smoking fire, it's really hard for me. I used to dip. I used to smoke cigarettes. I'm a combat veteran. I mean, over there, we were in a lot of stress and somebody was like, there's nothing we can do for you. Smoke cigarettes. And this was a medical professional. This was not just somebody. They were like, you should smoke cigarettes. It will help you with your anxiety.
But not cannabis. You're not allowed to have cannabis that could actually be healthy for you.
No, of course not. You don't want to start thinking for yourself. That's ridiculous. But anyway, yeah. Dip. And it's been 2 years. So I know it does put shit into my lungs. And that's where, like you said, if you do a bong, it won't perfectly help it, but it can aid in filtering out some of that. Then you can do a vaporizer. That's where I really have a passion for vaporizers, where I'm like, you just have that clear vapor. Maybe it's still creating a film, but it doesn't look like it's creating that black tar that you get from the resin.
Do you know, actually, so I tried a bunch of vaporizers. The first few years that I was actually like working as a cannabis nurse, I tried a few different vaporizers and I bought some expensive ones, like $300 vaporizers. And I was like, this is crap. I was so like, it's not as good, right? And I just felt like I wasn't getting what I needed. I was spending a lot of time.
Did you ever get the pen, like the little pen that you would use? That was a little that sucked. That's all I gotta say.
I liked.
Go ahead.
So I live in the UK now, but I'm from the US originally, and so in the UK we don't have concentrates like are available in a lot of places in the US. And so, but when I was in the States, I used, the cannabis, like the concentrate vaporizers, like the pens and the liquids, and you'd get the little cartridge and you screw it on, and I used those, and I really like the convenience of them. But being in the UK, where that's not an option, all we have is there's only medical here right now. Hopefully not for much longer, but that's what it is now. So what we can get is flour, and we can get oils. We can't really get tinctures, and the difference between a tincture and an oil being that a tincture it has some sort of a solvent like alcohol or sometimes use glycerin, I believe, but it has those solvents. So it basically can be absorbed in the lining of your mouth. So either under your tongue, in your cheeks. And so a tincture will take effect quickly, but a lot of places, this confuses my nurses all the time because a lot of the marketing uses the terms incorrectly. So when I say a tincture, I mean something that takes effect within 15 minutes. Usually those they'll have a long lasting effect because they get processed just like an oil, which is basically it goes through your digestive system, gets processed through your liver, and then it eventually makes its way to your bloodstream. But so having only these very basic options here in the UK, I've actually really fallen in love with dry herb vaporizers and actually using flour, getting flour, grinding it up, putting it in a vaporizer. And I started searching because I was like, over here, technically it's illegal to smoke cannabis, even if you're a medical patient. It's kind of a weird legal thing that they have. But dry herb vaporizing is the medical way to go over here in the UK. And we only have one device or one company that actually has devices that are considered actual medical vaporizers. Like they've passed the tests of whatever. And they're all by Stores and Bickle right now. So you've got the Volcano, they have the Mighty, the Crafty. They just came up with the Venti. I haven't tried all the different ones, but that was the first time when I tried those products. It was the first time that I actually was like, wow, this is just as good as smoking. And it was actually better. Medically, it felt just as good. I was getting the effects, but I didn't have as much of a cough. My airway felt a lot less sort of scratchy and itchy. And so I think now there are some great vaporizers on the market, but there didn't used to be. So I would say if you or anybody else is interested in using a vaporizer, definitely there are better ones out there than there used to be. And price isn't it's not the only thing, unfortunately, that tells you whether something is good. Because, man, the first really expensive $300 vaporizer I bought, it was such a waste. As a nurse, one of the things that I remember in my very first nursing job ever, I was a pediatric nurse, and I was working in a children's hospital. And I remember being told from the beginning that as a nurse, we can't recommend things to people. So like somebody needs a physical therapist. Well, I can't recommend a physical therapist to you, but I can give you a list of three of them, and you can pick from there. And so that's something that's always really been in my head when it comes to products and technology, all of these things, that as a nurse, and I realized this really quickly because I talked about, in my very first class, I talked about one of the vaporizers that I had tried. And what I was explaining to the students was, this has a great concept, because what it was supposed to do was it was supposed to vaporize at multiple different temperatures throughout the session so that you would get all of the different cannabinoids and terpenes. But the quality of it it didn't deliver. But what I was trying to explain was that the concept of this is really good, because it's not, the cannabis plant isn't just one thing. You've got all of these things that make it up. Just like you were talking about the chlorophyll earlier, we've got flavonoids and terpenes, all of these different things. So if you can use the whole plant and you can vaporize it in a way that, gives you access to all of those things, well, then that's great. That's ideal. But, it's by discussing it, some of my nurses went out and bought it. And so I was like, okay, I realized, it was the same thing. And I was like, it's not a great example. So I learned that I have to be really careful about when I talk about something, because I don't want to be seen as biased in one way or another. But I also realized that, it's just like with everything else with cannabis, there's a need for knowledge. And I had to kind of come to grips with, if I'm helping someone to access their medicine in a different way, in a better way, then they do need some guidance. They do need some recommendations. So now I have a few that, I can say, well, these are different ones that you can use, and here are some options. But it gets dangerous when you start recommending things as a professional, because you don't want to bias somebody, and then you have to take into account, the prices and the costs, and they are expensive. Even a cheap vaporizer might be, I think the cheapest one I've seen might be around $75, but the last one that I tried that was around that range, it wasn't very good either. So, but when you get a really good vaporizer, I will say, when I switched from my water bong to the Volcano, I probably used about a third of the flower that I used to use, because when you vaporize it, it goes further. And so if 1 week's supply suddenly lasts you 3 weeks, well, then that's where you start to save money. But it's all tricky. So that's why I think it's important to have as many nurses knowledgeable about these things, because it's hard for people to find information. And it's good to have programs like yours where you're sharing information and you're doing it in a non-threatening way, in a way that doesn't that doesn't make somebody worry, is this going to turn me into a stoner? Am I going to become a pothead? And, all of the things, all of the stigmas that we have from, decades, almost a century of sort of smack talk about the plant.
And really, that's where I saw a lot of people are like, why did you decide to do videos? And really, I did not want to do videos. I went looking for videos. And what I noticed was I came into the world of, let's say, hippies and stoners, and I have grown to love them. And I have seen that just because somebody looks a certain way, they can be the most brilliant person that I've ever met in my life, and totally judgment free, completely different than what I would have assumed them to be. And I realized I was putting them in a box. And so it's that's where I see that cannabis can really help. So I used to be totally against cannabis, and that's where I could see I can really help those who are against cannabis. As in, if I saw somebody smoking, immediately when I was against cannabis, I would have immediately said, stoner, I don't want to listen to them. They're going to be totally biased. They just want to smoke. And then when I started even getting pro cannabis, as soon as they started saying we're going to do medicinal cannabis, I was like, oh, it's just an excuse to get cannabis. Just legalize it. We don't need medical cannabis. We just need cannabis, because I didn't believe in medical cannabis. But the more you learn, the more you come into it. And that's where I just see, how did I used to think? And so how can I reach those people that are against cannabis? And that's where I don't like using on my videos. I will use on meetings. I will use on other people's programs and podcasts. But on mine, I want somebody to come and be like, okay, I just have to listen to him. He's just sitting here. I don't have to sit here and watch. Because
it can be scary at first, right? Because all of our lives, for very many of us, all of our lives, we've been told cannabis is a gateway drug. And if you just one hit, you can become a
heroin addict by the day's end. That's what I thought. I literally thought that I'd be looking for meth and heroin if I had touched cannabis.
It's the devil's weed. I mean, they did a really, really good media campaign to demonize this plant, and with it to demonize certain specific groups of people. And but what I really think is interesting, and what it made me think while you were talking, is there is the question, is all cannabis use medical? So now that you've had different sides of that, I'd be curious, what do you think?
So I had somebody say to me, and I did not think about it until this, because I truly did think that they were just people who would just like to enjoy just getting high. So I've enjoyed numbing myself. I smoked 2 ounces in a week, just consistently. And so all I was doing was suppressing feelings and dulling myself. But what I was posed to me was, anything you're using it for a medicinal reason in some way. You just might not know it. And when they said that, I was like, you're right. Even though I was numbing myself and I was abusing it, what I was doing was trying to suppress something so that I could get through the day. And so in a way, I was still trying to use it medicinally, but I didn't see it that way. And so when that was posed to me that way, yes, I think most people do. I think it can be used to be very fun, but still, I think everyone who has used cannabis, especially, let's say, when you couldn't find any and you end up smoking with somebody you detest or you did not enjoy or you really did not want to be around, and the more you smoked and talked to that person, you realize there's so much more to people. And what you're doing is you judge people. And when you stop judging people, we can all really come together. And I mean, we can have differences. Differences aren't the issue. It's us worrying about the differences. We shouldn't worry about what's going to happen to us after we die right now. What we should do is worry about what's going on right now. And sure, when we start using cannabis, I actually liked listening to other people's points of view. It did not change what I thought, but what it helped me do is connect to them personally. And then I was able to share my thoughts and they were able to, and it just humbled me in very many ways, and also them. And it just allows you to realize that all the things that we see as issues and problems is bullshit that the governments of all the worlds want us to believe, so that we're easily controlled. It's so easy to control us when we're all attacking each other. And we really, 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 really can use cannabis to help us to come together. And I think this is known. I mean, I would have not been somebody who would have accepted a hippie or a stoner in my younger years. I would not have been. I would have judged them. I would have thought, I do not want to listen to them. They can go be a hippie and stop the National Guard with some flowers in the barrel. That's how that's just how I was. And the cannabis just opened me up to realize how single-minded that was, to just see somebody from one little single act and then only blot out every human aspect of them. It's really, really interesting and crazy that we really do that. And it does. But what cannabis does is it helps us to open receptors that are typically closed to us, and it allows us to start listening. And that's an amazing thing to start coming together, is just being able to listen rather than wait for someone to stop talking.
Yeah. It's funny. I resonate with a lot of what you say. And I think, as you were talking, I was thinking what would be so nice and what I really miss and wish I had access to in my local area is consumption spaces. Because I think you're right. When you're sitting with people and cannabis does help you open your mind, and it doesn't make you think things that are opposite to what you believe. It's not a mind control drug, right? Like that was the fear in the 80s is your brain on drugs, all of these kind of things that like somehow it's going to control your mind, or it's going to.
This is your brain.
Exactly.
This is your brain on drugs.
Yep. Oh man, that's a piece. If you're going to add something in, that's the commercial to add in right there. As a memory of childhood,
oh yeah,
this is your brain on drug.
What's funny is I was on a podcast trying to remember one of those commercials, and I told them this commercial. When we looked it up, it was actually a spoof commercial that was on a comedy movie that I had, but it totally resonates with the commercials, and it's from Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle, and they're just watching this TV, and they're both high watching this pot commercial, and it's these two kids smoking pot. He goes, I'm going to go grab my dad's gun. He goes, no, you shouldn't do that. He goes, watch, I'm going to shoot myself. He goes, no. And then he shoots himself because he was smoking cannabis. And he goes, don't do drugs. And they're just laughing at it, smoking pot, because what idiot would even think about doing that? This is you. I want to keep sitting here and talking to you. Even if you had an intrusive thought, why would you even want to get up? Most people just want to sit there and relax. Anyway, that's the horrendous, the shit that they would throw down our throats back then. Now I'll probably have to.
But that was the message that we all got. That was and then, there was the other one, the shaming of the dad one. I learned it from watching you, Dad. And that was because he found the kid's stash, right? And we were brought up with all of these, just these ridiculous untruths and myths. And really, what do we have here? It's a plant. And it's a plant that when people consume it in the way that we have for thousands of, how long have humans been on the planet? But for so long, it's a plant. Like, let's chill out a little bit. Nobody's died from using the plant. Where I think we get into danger is when we start to try to think that we can, it's when we Jurassic Park things, right? When we think that we can play God, we can bioengineer something that will be the best weed ever. And you get people who are really excited about things like that. And it's like, okay, well, but when you start messing with nature, we don't have the same safety. We don't have the same kind of safety profile. We can't have the same expectations because, we're playing in our little Jurassic Park laboratory and we don't know what we're going to create. So I don't know.
And if they want to do that, go ahead, but we should have the education for people to understand what that is. And so that's where I'm like, hey, everybody should be able to do what they want in cannabis. My issue is people don't know about the medicinal side of cannabis. And then when you get to the people who are like me, who just love THC and want to do everything they can to make the THC go up, to make the most concentrated products, keep doing that if you want. But we should have the education of people to realize how detrimental that can be when you're younger, and that is really not the greatest like a medicinal aspect. Like, I've had dabs that put me into states where I thought I was on crack. I felt like I just drank 5 shots of alcohol and I was ready to hit somebody. And I'm like, cannabis shouldn't make me feel violent. Cannabis should make me feel calm. And so that's why I stopped doing dabs. Now, that's just me. I have a lot of other issues. It's my PTSD, my TBI, all that. I'm sure that played a factor in it. But I just saw when I did that, I was like, that's not doing what flower does. And so I started looking into it, and I'm just like, you're taking so much away when you get into a dab to a concentrate like that. You just, all the terpenes, all the flavonoids, all of that. And even if you reintroduce terpenes, you have no idea. This is the thing that kills me is on, like, let's say I have this cannabis here, and it says 3 different terpenes that are in this. You think that it's only 3 terpenes that are in that flower? No. And that's the only terpenes you're going to reintroduce, but you do not have the full terpene profile. And that's where I'm just like, just because it's minute doesn't mean it's not having an effect. I mean, now you find out about THCP, and people didn't even know that we had a 7 alkyl chain. Now, I say this a lot because people don't know what an alkyl chain is. Do you know what the alkyl chain is of a cannabinoid?
I know that it's a molecular structure, and that's about.
So the alkyl chain is on the molecule. It's like a tail of it, and each one has a tail, and there's little segments of that tail. A THC has 5 segments to the tail. It's what grafts onto your receptor and allows it to actually perform. You can have 3 receptors. Anything less, it will not grasp onto your receptor. 3 is very weak. THC is 5. So we created THCO, which is a synthetic cannabinoid, which has 7 chains. And so it will grasp on and be more powerful than THC. And that's where, but it's also synthetic. It has there's nothing, you don't find that in the body. That's where I do not like it. THCP was discovered in 2020 as a natural occurring cannabinoid in cannabis that has a 7-alkyl chain as a THC. So I'm told, I have not seen it myself, so I don't like saying I know, but I'm told that it has it's much more potent than THC, just like Delta 8, very minute amounts.
That's interesting.
I think what that's doing when you have that with your cannabis rather than if you didn't have that.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you bring up synthetics, because I think what people don't realize is that the reason that we don't have any deaths attributed to cannabis is because cannabis, if you think about the key and lock metaphor, so the cannabinoids in cannabis don't fit the lock perfectly. THC is what's known as a partial agonist, and you probably understand this, but I don't want to get too complicated into it. So essentially, you have a key that will turn the lock and it'll open the door, but it doesn't open it all the way. Or, maybe when it opens it gets a little bit off, like it's a little bit squint. It's not quite square. So what plant-based cannabis does,
it's like a broken window. You just get it open a little bit, get a little bit of air in, but you don't get that. You don't get the stuffiness away.
Yeah.
But I got you. Yeah.
So that's kind of how plant-based cannabis works. But what happens with synthetics is the synthetics are made to be the perfect fit for the lock. So the reason that we don't have depth, when I first started learning about cannabis, what I was told was that we didn't have any cannabinoid receptors in the brainstem. The brainstem is what is responsible for our basic bodily functions like breathing and keeping the heart beating. So that's what I was originally told. But since then, they have discovered, in fact, that there are cannabinoid receptors pretty much everywhere, including the brainstem. So I thought, okay, well, that doesn't explain why people haven't died from overdosing with cannabis. What happens with opioids is they're a perfect key for the lock. Cannabis, not a perfect key. So if you have too many opioids, they open that door perfectly. The door is wide open and all of the medicine can get in there. And if you get too much of an opioid, you can essentially, it will stop your heart from beating, your lungs from breathing. It stops that function at that very basic level. And so with synthetics, I think synthetics are really dangerous because they're made to be the perfect key. And so if you have the perfect key for that lock and you open the door all the way,
that's a great point.
That's not what cannabis does. That is not what the plant does. And that's I mean, I appreciate pharmaceuticals. When I need antibiotics, if I'm sick enough with a bacterial infection that I really need antibiotics, then I'm going to take them because that's going to help make me feel better. And I can take probiotics. I can eat my good diet, my gut boosters to get my microbiome back together. But I'm grateful that we have antibiotics. I'm grateful we're not dying from dysentery, but I would rather not take them if I don't have to. I would rather do the things that are healthy. So I would rather stick with what's natural, what we know works, what we know is safe. And it doesn't mean that it's safe for everybody. It doesn't mean it's right for everybody. We've talked you and I, about, what constitutes problematic use because we've both seen it. And there are some people who they stop participating in their lives. They use cannabis to numb themselves. And sometimes, I want to make this really clear, sometimes it is really appropriate for us to numb ourselves. If I'm getting angry, I want to be numb. If you have to function and you are being triggered by some trauma in your past that's not letting you do your job, you might need to be numb for a bit. And the way that I like to think about it is in a way that people are actually pretty comfortable with right now. And that's with something like postpartum depression. So when I had my son, we had lost pregnancies. We had been through a lot of IVF. It was a big process to conceive and to carry my son. And,
well, congratulations.
Thank you. it was really hard. And then I had the baby. The birth was really traumatic. I mean, it was all sorts of fun. But then afterwards, I had postpartum depression, and I had a really hard time functioning, and I really wanted to be enjoying this amazing baby that I had, but I just needed some help functioning. And I was in North Carolina at the time. Cannabis was not available to me. My son is 8, so things have changed a lot since I was pregnant. But what I ended up doing was I went on, I think it was like 6 weeks of antidepressants. And what it did for me was it let me kind of establish my new equilibrium. It let me be a bit more numb from this thing that was overwhelming. And, and then when I was done with taking them, I was able to, I still had to process all of the feelings I had. I still had to deal with the traumas, the disappointments, and also the joy. Like, I had this huge range of emotions that I had to deal with, but the antidepressants were what one of my nurses is a psych mental health practitioner, and she and I have had a lot of conversations around this kind of topic. And she talked about using cannabis as a bridge therapy. And I went, oh, that's exactly what I did with the antidepressants when I had my postpartum depression. And cannabis is a thing that can help us. And when we do need to be numb, sometimes that's appropriate. And sometimes sometimes numbing ourselves is what lets us move forward. It's not a permanent cure, but if it can help somebody reestablish an equilibrium, then I'm okay with somebody taking a little bit of time to kind of numb themselves so that they can function again. And so it's something that I think is important to acknowledge, that sometimes it is appropriate to numb ourselves. But if we're talking about problematic use, that's, I think, when we stop participating in our lives and it becomes more about the thing than it is about how it helps us function.
Agreed. Really quick, before I forget, I want to go back to something you said much earlier. And that was when you said Western medicine as opposed to Eastern medicine with cannabis. What kills me is
I hope it's not actually
they were kind of merged.
I hope it's not actually killing you. Sorry.
Very funny. No, you're good. They used to be very like merged. That's what's awful, because when they really attacked cannabis in the 1930s, let's say right before that, cannabis was in the pharmacopoeia in the US. It was in a lot of pharmacopoeias. And let's say William O'Shaughnessy. Do you know who he is? William O'Shaughnessy from Ireland was in India, and he was doing such great. I mean, a lot of his work was creating the pharmacopoeia in 1850, or at least a lot was being put in there. And so it's amazing what we did know about cannabis. And if you actually read about Anslinger when he was younger, he had no problem with cannabis. It did not bother him whatsoever. And he actually said, I actually think there's medicinal value to it. However, once alcohol got made legal, the bureaus were going to become obsolete. And so they needed something to attack. Yeah. And that's where cannabis came in. However, just like in Gladiator, there's a line, and I'll put it up here if I can find it, and it says, he's not going to kill you. He can't kill you until he kills your name first. And that's how Anslinger saw cannabis. I can't attack. Everyone knows cannabis as medicine. Everyone knows hemp as industrial equipment. If I attack those, I'm going to attack industry. So, in the Mexican pharmacopoeia, they have this thing called marijuana. It doesn't even mean cannabis. It just means preparing cannabis. But I'm going to say that the Mexican immigrants brought this new drug called marijuana, and it's killing all of us. And it's causing psychosis. It's making everyone be criminals. And that's the Mexicans. The crazy thing is he could have even used African Americans rather, because they actually brought it to Jamaica. That's where we had cannabis first in the Americas, was, I believe, the African Americans being forcibly taken Jamaica as slaves, they brought cannabis seeds with them and they started growing, and that's where Jamaica is so synonymous. But I digress there. They could have used that. They didn't. They created something so fake and so crazy. And in 36, that doctor from American Medical Association was in Congress saying, nobody knows what marijuana is. I know that marijuana is cannabis, but no other doctors will, and they would not get behind this. And they said, yeah, we don't care.
Well, but how many times have we all heard the news reports about there's a crazy new drug out there? You know, it's fear mongering. And to be very, very clear, Anslinger, I agree with you. He didn't care about cannabis. He didn't like people of color. He wanted to marginalize and essentially wipe out groups of the population. And he wanted to find a way to punish them just for existing. And so he was such a word that I probably shouldn't use on your program. And
he and others like him hijacked the temperance movement. That's what really got me. Like the temperance movement, I did not like it, but I understood why it started. I mean, a bunch of women being beat by their drunk husbands wanting to stop alcohol. I get that. That makes sense to me. Then they hijacked it because for 100 years, temperance movement, just alcohol. 1906. Oh, we want cannabis. Oh, just so you know, there's this new drug, opiate and acetaminophen, that are both worse for you. And cannabis can help you get off both of those. However, we're going to vilify cannabis.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was a tool. It was what is, I think, has been done throughout history over and over again. It was a tool to make groups of people different so that people felt they were other, because that's what groups of humans tend to do together. Maybe individually we don't do it as much, but groups of humans, it seems to be this biological thing where we create an us versus them. And so if you can create a boogeyman, a scary, I mean, boogeyman, where does that term come from? Because with Anslinger, he was really opposed to jazz musicians. So, I mean, in the UK, they call it a bogeyman, which I think is different, but I don't know. I mean, there's so many things that were taken that were good things that were taken as a way to vilify somebody else, to make people feel afraid. And that's what's been done with cannabis. And it was done really successfully, really horribly successfully, and we're still cleaning that mess up. And we're still cleaning up that mess in a lot of ways in our culture and our society. There are a lot of messes that we need to clean up. But, you know, this is one it's starting to gain traction. You know, people are starting to understand that actually, you know, it makes me crazy. So people think that it's fine, totally acceptable to come home at the end of the day. You have your glass of red wine. It's got the resveratrol in it. So it's got antioxidant benefits and whatever else. But alcohol in general, we know is not great for the body. Yeah. I mean, and if you compare,
you can die from excess amounts of it because it's fucking poison.
That's the thing. And we have poison in terms of alcohol, which we're comfortable with, and cannabis, in which we're not comfortable with, even though you can die from one and not the other. This one can send you into liver failure. That one's not going to. But it's because we make up these rules in our minds and in society. And we all had the wool pulled over our eyes for a very long time.
And cannabis, how many religions were using it for medicinal reasons? And then and I know people don't like me saying this, but even in Christianity and Judaism, it was used. And that's what kills me. This is how I found out. I actually thought it was probably calamus, not cannabis in the Bible. And I've did a lot of research on, there are supposedly health benefits with calamus. However, it doesn't work specifically. I haven't seen anything where they know that it works specifically in anything in the body. So a lot of it is speculation and some of it is corroborated. However, with cannabis, this is where I see the the evidence pointing to cannabis now being in the Bible and being used as medicinal, because it was used in the holy anointing oil. And the people are like, what is that? That was actually, it wasn't just to anoint people. What it was somebody was sick. They would go to the high priest and he would put this oil all over you and then pray. And it was supposed to heal you. Why wouldn't it be cannabis? Cannabis as an oil is such a great topical agent that can really, really work on all your endocannabinoid system. That's another reason your endocannabinoid system, if you believe God created everything, then why wouldn't he have created that?
Yeah.
Where you were talking about with the receptors and stuff. So if you can see this right here, this is where I like this for a visual representation for people whenever they see it. So this artist has the CB1 and CB2 receptors, which most people know about. But one thing that a lot of people don't know about, which I know that you do, because I think we talked about it last time, was you said it was the TRIP V1? Trip V1?
Like
that's the one.
If you remember, like you're taking a trip, like if you think about like your trip, if you think about psychedelic cannabis or psychedelics or anything else. So it's trippy, trip V, whatever. Or,
Trip V1. Gotcha. And then the GPR, all the GPRs, there's like 3 different ones at least that she has listed. And that is where I love that people can see, because you were talking about all the different receptors in the body.
Yeah.
And then that's where every single one of these dots is corresponding to where the receptor would be with the color that is on there. And that is how many receptors that you find in the body. And that's what's crazy. Now, CB1 is typically in the brain, but it is throughout the body, but just very seldomly throughout the body.
Well, what they say is in the nervous system. So if you think about your nervous system, if you think about the brain and then all the nerves run down your spine. So because your spine, like its job is to protect that bundle of nerves. So if you think of your nervous system, your brain and then going down the spine. And then they say that the CB2 receptors are more peripheral and, immunological functions and in the gut, things like that. But yeah, there are tons of receptors. And I think it seems to me like every day they're discovering some new way that the body interacts with the endocannabinoid system, whether it's the way that our endogenous cannabinoids like anandamide and 2-AG, ways that they interact with all the different receptors that we have, whether it's the cannabinoid receptors, CB1 and 2, the trip V1 and those receptors, the GDPR, not GDPR.
That's the GDPR.
Sorry, GDPR, the data protection thing in Europe and the UK. I was like, wait, blah, blah. But, the point is that it's a really complicated system, right? And so what I'm really good at, my specialty, and the reason that I took on teaching is because what I'm really good at is taking complex information and then bringing it down to a level that's understandable. And a lot of times it's a level that's understandable to my 8-year-old, and I mean, he's very clever, but, and I'm not saying that I'm dumbing it down, but it's easier to understand things when we can visualize it or when we have a way of thinking about it. So one of the things that I always talk about is there are a lot of people who are talking about, let's upregulate the endocannabinoid system. And I'm like, that sounds a little bit, well, it smacks of hubris to me, because we're going to decide, we've got this system that we don't even completely know everything about it yet, but we've decided that we're going to upregulate it because we have that more is always better sort of culture, don't we? And so everyone's like, oh yeah, we're going to upregulate the immune system. Well, or we're going to upregulate the endocannabinoid system, or we're going to upregulate this by attacking the endocannabinoid system, whatever it is that we're going to do. And so people think about like, well, if you're upregulating it, what does that really mean? And so we can talk about increasing receptors and all of that, but that can be hard for people to understand. So I always think of it as like you're in a walled city and you've got these gates, and the different gates are where things can, come in or go out. And so when you want to upregulate, there's this idea that we're going to open all the gates and we're going to get as many people flooding into our city as possible. Well, what happens when you get too many people in a city? You get poor hygiene, sewage becomes an issue, especially if you're thinking like medieval walled cities, So upregulation is not always the goal, but learning to balance our endocannabinoid system, finding the place where, we can handle the amount of people that are in the city. Do you have enough sewage? Do you have enough clean water? Okay, well then that's a pretty good way to be. Do we have too much of those things? Maybe we need some more people. But the endocannabinoid system is all about balance. And so when we look at this, it's so complicated. And even, there are so many pictures that you can get. Like the one that you have is pretty cool. I like that it is showing the different types of receptors and how they are in different places. But I think what we're going to find as we keep going is that
more.
It's everywhere. I don't know if we're going to be able to separate it. I'm not saying that, the endocannabinoid system is infinite. Obviously, we've got bones in there. We've got blood in there. There are other things in our systems. But I think what we're going to find as we keep learning more and as technology improves, that we have so much access to balance and to health and to wellness and to feeling good. And it doesn't all have to be hard and miserable. Cannabis breaks the cardinal rule of hard work produces results, right?
Or how about you're not supposed to enjoy your medicine? Exactly.
But the thing is we have known for decades, 100 years. How long have we known as healthcare and healing professionals, whatever generation of them you are, we know that relieving your stress helps you to get better. Doctors have known that for it's in all the research. This is not anything new. So to me, if you're going to have something like cannabis that is going to relieve your stress, and it's also anti-inflammatory, and it also helps to balance your immune system, and it makes you feel good, where's the flaw?
I want you to think about something really quick. Because this is something you brought up about the brothers, and they were doing autopsies on, cadavers, or at least giving the cadavers to scientists to do anyway. The ancient civilizations that use cannabis as a medicine, China and Egypt, they knew the most about medical cannabis prior to 2000 BC. Do you know? Can you guess why?
Well, I think they were some, at least as far as I know, I think that they were the civilizations that had some of the most advanced medical knowledge to begin with. I think Egypt, and
why?
I think also Egypt, China, and then in India, when Ayurveda was, where Ayurveda comes from. Mm-hmm. But I would assume that it was because they had been using it for a long time. They'd been studying it, and it grew in those areas. There are areas of the world where I know now it grows everywhere because we have greenhouses, but.
Did you say Agraveda?
Ayurveda.
Okay. I've probably been saying, I think I said Ayurveda. Okay. Anyway, they did mummification.
Okay.
So they actually removed all the organs from the body. And that is one reason why the Egyptians were so advanced in they did brain surgery in 1500, 2000 BC. We have skulls that were healed from brain surgery. So they were very advanced. And that is one reason, like you said, they would remove, they looked at the insides of these bodies. So did the Chinese. They had mummies as well. And so not as much. I just think that they did, the Egyptians just knew what they were doing. But that's one thing to really think about, because they really used cannabis as medication in so many ways. And the Egyptians specifically, almost everything they use it for can be attributed to, we have proven it in today's world. Rheumatism, inflammation. That was one of their biggest things, was using cannabis for inflammation. Now we know. And so that's another thing to think about in the ancient world. And that's another reason. Oh yeah. For Christians using cannabis also, a lot of people don't know, but there's archaeological evidence of cannabis residue in a temple being used on the altar in the Holy of Holies. So we do have evidence of cannabis being used in Jewish religions. And that's why I would say cannabis, not calamus. And even in 1944, I found out that there was a Presbyterian group. I think like Presbyterian, like the main Presbyterian Christian group, were all for decriminalizing cannabis. They saw that cannabis had a lot of medicinal value, and they also thought that it was cannabis and not calamus. And what kills me is so many people, even in the Presbyterian world today, they hate cannabis. They think cannabis is so terrible. And I'm just like, why? I'm okay with alcohol, but we're all okay with alcohol except for Baptists. We're all okay for alcohol. It's great. But cannabis, no, that's terrible for you.
But I think it's history too. It's what we've been taught and the things that we don't question. And I think that's one of the most dangerous things we can do as people, is not to question the things that we're told, that when we maybe get a sense, is that correct? Or maybe that's not quite correct. If we don't question it, how can we learn and how can we grow? And I think, we do have, sort of to your point, we have this, our Western belief that the scientific method started in the 1800s or something. We think that our culture, our modern culture, is because we have the most advanced technology, because we have devices and cars and whatever else, we think that means that we know everything. And so Western medicine has, it's kind of dismissed a lot of these older cultures that have really established knowledge. And, I think a lot of times what happens is they say, well, the ancient Egyptians, they believed in all these gods, which is different from our mainstream culture. Therefore, that means that they don't know anything about science. Well, have you been to the pyramids? They're pretty big. So they must have figured out some things, right? Like there's just this idea that modern is better and we know more. And in a lot of ways,
even aside from that, you should show respect, because even in Christianity and Judaism, they showed respect to the ancient Egyptians, and they didn't just, they would say our God is stronger, but they showed respect. That was one thing that really kills me about people when they talk about, I don't want to get into religious talk. I don't try to preach to anybody, but that's one thing that Christians, they so many attack so many people and judge them. And what we're supposed to do is love everyone and accept them for who they are as human beings, not hate them and attack them. And that's something that a lot of Christians lose sight of.
I think it's really interesting for a country that talks a lot about the separation of church and state. I don't think we've seen that as Americans. The founding fathers, they were not saints. We know that the country was built on the backs of genocide. Our economy was built off of slave labor. There's a lot that's wrong, but I think we can also look at the things that are right and the ways that we're coming together. And I don't mean that in a way to dismiss the ugly things that are happening, because I think that we have to tackle them. I think that it's one of the things, cannabis prohibition has been so tied into race. It has been such a tool used to marginalize and criminalize people who, I think, a lot of the people who have been criminalized for using cannabis are people who probably were in very high stress lives. I think they were people who were dealing with a lot. I think that a lot of times people turn to cannabis because they've been traumatized. And one of the things that I think cannabis helps us do is it helps us to step away from the trauma that we have internalized in whatever way. And you'll see that there's a huge amount of people who are in the cannabis world that have had, serious traumas in their lives. And I think it's because what cannabis seems to do is it helps us to separate. I always say when we have memories and traumas, it's like you have emotions and you have the thing that happened, and everything gets tangled up together. And I think what cannabis helps us do is I think it helps us separate those things so that we can look from a bit of a distance, so that we can maybe get some perspective, pull us up out of ourselves, because we're looking at everything from our view, right? But if we can kind of lift up from that a little bit, if we can get a different perspective for whatever it is we're going through, that's incredibly healing, and it can help us to change our behavior. Like you talked about with smoking, how you can still want a cigarette years after you stopped smoking cigarettes and tobacco, and but then you hear stories about people who use psilocybin once and never feel the need to smoke again. We have these tools in nature. We have things that can help us. And when the help far outweighs the harm, I think as a health or medical professional, I think it goes against the intention, the doing no harm, the caring for our patients without judgment. I think when these things are ignored, when we have evidence that shows, and we have clinical evidence, we have research evidence, and we have real world evidence, and we have lots of different types. Cannabis isn't something that you can research like you do pharmaceuticals. With a pharmaceutical, the gold standard you always hear is the randomized controlled trial. And that's because a pharmaceutical is one thing. And so you're going to clear away all of the other variables, and you're going to only test this one thing. And that is incredibly powerful to do in a randomized controlled trial. And
not only that, drug discovery, when you're looking for something that attaches specifically to something else in the body, that is cannabis. But we do not do it on a federal level. And that's what's crazy. I mean, I one of my first podcasts I did was with a biochemist, PhD. And he was telling me, he was like, when we do drug discovery, that's the thing. We look for the specific thing that binds to something else. And the better it binds, the better that you can do with discovery. That is cannabinoids from the cannabis plant. Perfect. That is what we want to use. But yet, anyway.
Well, I mean, like pharmaceuticals, they have benefited us, right? As whether you love them or hate them, they've benefited us as a society. It's why there are so many more humans now than ever before. At least I assume that's true. It seems like you're always hearing about population explosions, don't quote me on that. But the thing is that there's sometimes when we want something that's really high tech and really specific and really targeted, and those times that's appropriate. And I think that there are some patients, some medical cannabis patients, who really should be treated like this is any other medication, because there are people with complex medical histories, with complicated different disorders that interact with each other. When you're dealing with lots of different medications, that can be, the problems that we have from drug interactions alone. It's mind blowing. There's and I don't remember the exact, I should probably memorize this, but basically with drugs, if you have one drug, okay, you're not going to have any interactions. Maybe with food, something like that. You have two drugs, then I think it becomes like a 50% chance of interaction or whatever. I don't remember exactly what it is. But the more medicines that you're taking at one time, the more chances you are of having an interaction. And so when we're taking all of these different drugs for different things, they're all doing isolated things, but the body has to process them. It's got to find a way to use them, and then it's got to find a way to get the drugs out of your system. But if cannabis works with the master regulatory system of the body...
I'm going to need to stop you really quick. I've got to run to the bathroom.
Okay.
I've got to be shaking all over the place. I'll be right back.
Sure.
Oh, I feel like a new man.
Oh, that's good. I was just looking this up to see if I could see what the what the numbers are.
If you find it, if you want, you don't have to, but there's a share button and you can share your screen if you want to show it.
Okay.
But you don't have to.
Okay, let me see if I can just, I don't know. I'm not sure I can find it, but
take your time.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Numbers on what?
Well, basically when you take more than one drug at a time, you have polypharmacy. And so there was something that I remember reading where like they say like if you take 2 drugs together, you have the 50% chance of having an interaction. And if you take like 5 drugs, you're guaranteed they're going to interact with each other.
Okay. I got you.
But I can't find it. So I'll just,
I've heard nurses refer to cannabis as a polypharmacy itself.
Yeah. So polypharmacy is, well, are we still recording? Should I just go back?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
You're fine. You're fine.
Okay. Yeah. So polypharmacy refers to basically when people are taking multiple medications and they have interactions with each other. So essentially, anytime you take a drug, your body has to, it absorbs it, it takes it in, and it uses it, however it uses it, and then it's got to get it out of the body. Just like with food, we take in food, we get what we need out of it, and then we get rid of the waste. So polypharmacy is used to refer to when people have multiple different medications that they're taking at one time. And so the more different medications that you're taking, the more likely it is that you're going to have an interaction. And so sometimes you can get adverse reactions. Sometimes they interact like you'll have more of one medicine present than the other one. And it's a common thing that happens with CBD. And I know you've had Jana on here and she talks a lot about medication interactions, because she and I feel the same way, that's probably one of the biggest issues that we currently have, is that people are using CBD or THC and they're taking them with other medications, and we can have reactions, because what happens is, if you think about your liver, it can only process so much at one time. So if you give it CBD plus another medication, then the liver's got to process both of them. And so it's breaking it down. It's, maybe it's changing it to a different form. Like THC goes from delta 9 THC to 11 hydroxy THC. Mm-hmm. So the liver is doing all
very different too.
Mm-hmm, yeah. And so the liver's got all this work to do, but it can only do so much at one time. So if your liver is processing CBD along with another medication, what can happen is you can end up with too much of the other medication in your system. And so that's one of the benefits with CBD a lot of times, is that people may need less medication than what they needed before. And obviously, if you have multiple different things that you're taking, the more that you're taking, the more chances of an interaction happening. So where you've said that sometimes you've heard of people referring to cannabis as a polypharmacy, they're using the same word, but I think they're using it in a different way, because what the beauty is with cannabis is it's got multiple things inside of it. It's not one isolated drug. So you're getting...
And it can all work at the same time.
Mm-hmm, yeah. And that's the entourage effect, which I'm sure you know about. And I'm sure your audience probably knows about it too, because lots of people are talking about the entourage effect. But essentially what it means is that everything works better together. And when you just take one thing, it can just do whatever things that does. But when it works together, there's more that can happen. It's kind of a magic. I grew up Catholic. I'm not religious now, but I always remember there was a saying about, when 2 or more are gathered in my name, there was this idea that when people gather together, the group is greater when you're gathered with purpose and there's synergy. And you know what that's like when you're with people, and the things that you come up with, the ideas you come up with, are better than you would have come up with on your own. Well, the entourage effect it's like the plant version of that, where everything works better together, because because it's the magic of nature. I mean, like, we can get into all of the science of it, but in the end, I really feel like that's the magic of nature. Life is complex and nature is complex. You said something earlier that reminded me of something that Paul Stamets said about the mycelial network and psilocybin. I think it was in the Netflix documentary, the big one, Fantastic Fungi. And he said something along the lines of, just because we can't hear it or understand it doesn't mean nature isn't communicating. Like, and that our ability to hear what nature is telling us does not actually limit the magic of nature, the magic of life itself. You know, so just because we don't understand it doesn't mean that there isn't something amazing and wonderful happening. And that's where, when we really get into plant medicine and the natural world, I mean, it's beautiful. Life is beautiful and it's complex. And if we can be humble to that, instead of thinking that we need to go out and conquer it, I think we learn a lot more.
And that's where a lot of people can get it wrong. And this is not just Christian. This is everybody. We like to tend to the earth. I mean, that's what humanity really likes to do. Some people will mangle what that means, and they'll say, well, I need to conquer it. I'm human. I'm the one who's in charge of it all. But when you become a father, when you become a parent, one thing that you realize is, yes, you are in charge of that child. You are the boss of that child. You could make that child do whatever you wanted, but that's not what it is. It's about respecting and loving and wanting to nurture that and let it grow and make it better than it was before. And meaning you want to make your child better than you are. And that's how I see that we should be seeing the earth and everything. You don't have to be a tree hugger. You don't have to be what you would call an environmentalist crazy person to enjoy the environment and want to go out. I've seen some people with the exact same passion about the environment who are environmentalists and hunters. A hunter, and she's very much not a hunter, as you might have guessed. But she said her husband is even sometimes more in tune to nature than she is, because he understands, like, we have predators for a reason. And, our populations have to be checked. And when you don't, like, we got rid of wolves all throughout North America.
Same in Scotland.
They did a lot of, and we get why they did it. They killed, they got worried about it. They would take children, that type of a thing. So they got rid of wolves. Shouldn't have done it. It happened. We can't take it back. Now, reintroducing wolves, they want to do that, but a lot of people don't understand what they're doing when they do that. But that's where hunting became such a big thing. Was, I mean, even bears used to be everywhere, and now they're just on the coast in very seldom spots. But that's where hunting really can help with population control. And when you become a good hunter, you actually become a really big environmentalist, because, I mean, I've seen so many hunters say, I saw we can all see that, but so many people are seen to see the other person as the enemy, and will refuse to see that it's possible to love it in a different way.
Well, it's the same kind of thing that has been discussed about there are some similarities to veganism, into the whole community that's really into the paleo, the whole paleo movement. And a lot of people, vegans will say, I don't want to eat animal products because animals are being mistreated. If you've ever been in the middle of the country and you've driven past, like, factory farming, the cattle lots, I mean, you smell them for miles. It's horrendous. And it's just a big mud pit where all the cows, and that's the outdoor ones, right? But I've driven past some, and it's just a mud pit with a bunch of cows who've got their head in troughs, right? That's not how, I mean, we are what we eat, right? So if your animals are full of adrenaline and fear and stress, I mean, that's what you're eating. That's not good for you. But then on the other side, you have people who are, I've seen it a lot in the paleo community, but also people who are really concerned with making sure that they're getting, grass-fed meat, that their pork is pastured, that their chickens are free range and actually allowed to go, run around and eat bugs and things like that. It's this concept that we are what we eat, and that the way that big agriculture is producing our food is wrong. And so you can have similar mindsets, but the way you achieve your goals is different. So for some people that might be veganism. For me, I'm not a person who does well without meat. I need animal protein for my body, but I am really careful about where I get that from. And so it's different ways of attacking the same problem. And we have lots of options. It just takes us being a little bit more open-minded. And as you said before, that's a wonderful thing that cannabis can do for us.
Yes. And what kills me about the animal industry, and yes, it could be so much better. There's so many people who are just looking to profit. But another thing that drives it, and it kills me because a lot of people don't think about it, is cities. It's what drove us to industrialize our food, is because we needed to feed millions of people in little secluded areas. I'm from a rural area. I love rural areas. I don't do well with lots of people. Combat veteran. I like being alone. But it's amazing what you have to do to be able to feed people like that. And trust me, it doesn't have to be the way it is. It could be better, but it takes a lot of land. It takes a lot of area. It's a lot of that. It takes knowledge and skill. I like veganism type mindsets. I just think that they if you can, it's good to incorporate plant or animal protein. I get some people don't do well with it. I understand that. I accept everybody for how they do. However, it can be so much more damaging to just do farming instead of just cattle and stuff like that. If you're trying to do it on a small plot of land, and that's what kills me, is I know what it does and how many animals and different living creatures. I like doing what was it? It was some movie I was watching, and it was some guy. It was like an assassin or something. But every time he killed somebody, he would plant. It was like medieval or something. He would plant. He was like, "Death gives way to life" or something like that. And it was just showing he had a different way of looking at it as anybody else. He wanted it to be for something. He didn't. It helped him thinking that what he was doing was helping something else live, and that was something. It's more people need to see it that way.
Well, I think really everything that I teach, everything I do in my personal life, I think maybe not everything, but everything, like the key things to me seem to be always about getting back to the basics. So it's getting back to one of my specialty areas is lifestyle medicine. And it's another area where I think nurses are ideally suited, because lifestyle medicine is essentially patient education. When we look at lifestyle medicine, we're looking at how do we live and how does that affect whether we're sick or whether we're well, and so I've studied so much nutrition. I have spent decades studying it. I've done specialized trainings, and I've studied over 100 different dietary theories. And you know what it comes down to? Eat good food that looks like food, stuff that your grandma would recognize, not processed, not prepared, not, powders that you put into but eat real foods. And for some people, the foods that they prefer are going to be different, but essentially eat real foods. Like that's the best thing that you can do for your body nutrition wise. Eat real foods that have that, vegetables, plants, meats, eat real things and drink clean water, drink things that nourish you. Don't drink things that are full of chemicals and sugar, right? But then it's get good sleep. So all of these things are things that also, it turns out, balance our endocannabinoid system. I think what's
and where you get your meat from, because think about what they put in their meat at the grocery store, as opposed if you get your meat from where you're getting your meat from. That's one thing I started doing. And it sounds like you're like, it's very expensive to just buy a cow or buy half a cow. And you're like, oh my gosh. But if you get together as a couple of friends and you guys buy half a cow together, separate that, you'll realize you save tons of money. It's so much better for you. Like, let's just take me, for example, as opposed to my other family, my kids and my wife, they do medicines. They take cold medicines. They eat whatever they want, everything with additives, preservatives. I try to deter it as much as I want or can, but I try not to be crazy. I don't eat any of that stuff. I don't take medicines. The only medicine I take is cannabis. I don't take any cold medicines. If I feel bad, my body's going to take care of it. If it's life-threatening, I will go. Mm-hmm. And I've noticed they've been sick 8 times more than I have. They have to constantly jam that medicine down their throats, and then they're sick again in 2 weeks later. And my immune system just seems to be so much stronger now. Mm-hmm. And so there's something to not eating all the bullshit that they put into that crap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, and there's research that shows that exposure to nature can lower your blood pressure. Like, there are all of these things, and that's what I mean about getting back to basics. Even they did a study, and I don't remember all the full details of it, but basically what they showed was that even looking at pictures of nature was calming to the body. So even if you can't get outside into nature, I'm like pointing at my window here because that's, but even if you can't get outside into nature, if you look at nature, like, these things are really basic, and they're not things that make a lot of money. So big pharma's not going to spend a lot of time telling you to go out there and do your forest bathing because you can't patent that. And so all of these things, cannabis is just another way to get back to the basics. It is a plant medicine. This is for, generation upon generation, these are the things that we had to help us be well. And because in the past they were referred to as ill humors or, bad winds or the spirits of disease or whatever, we sort of dismiss it as a culture because, they were just superstitious. But actually, if this is the medicine that you have access to, the air and the water and the clean foods, when you go back to that, it makes a big difference. And it's one of my favorite quotes is by, I can't possibly pronounce his name. Krishnamurti is the last name. The first name, I apologize. I always butcher it. But basically what he said is, it's no measure of health to be well-adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And I think that's kind of the situation that we have right now, is that we've been fed a whole bunch of lies. We've listened to the demonization of a plant that doesn't kill anybody and has never killed anybody in the thousands of years we've been using it. And, but we're happy to let people take Tylenol and ibuprofen and, and I remember going into nursing school in the dialysis units, and the nurse is saying, oh yeah, I've had patients that have gone into liver failure or kidney failure or whatever, just because just one day their body just did not seem to take that acetaminophen anymore. And these are things that we take all the time. We give to our kids. We don't think about it, but
nobody thinks about it. How many people die from acetaminophen overdose? Mm-hmm. A lot. And people don't think about that. It's very easy to overdose on acetaminophen. Why? Why do we use poison as medicine? Well, cannabis, it is almost, maybe I could do it. It is almost impossible to die by consuming. I think it's physically impossible to consume that much THC.
It is. There's a measure, I think they call it the LD50, and it's the dose by which 50% of people, if they have this dose, will die. from taking the medicine. And there is one of those established for probably every pharmaceutical out there. They have it established, even spinach. Like, there is a dose at which too much spinach is lethal. I mean,
water.
But
water is lethal at too much.
There isn't one with cannabis, with plant-based cannabis. There, but where it gets dangerous is when people are thinking that they're getting good plant-based cannabis, but they don't have access to it. So if you're buying it on the illicit market, you don't know what you're getting. Now, I understand that when you don't have access to the meds that you need, you'll do what you have to do. And I think I think it's shameful that is the situation that we're in so many places, and hopefully not for much longer, but I'll believe it when I see it.
I went through 2010 is when I started using medical cannabis, and it was still joked about in California that it was real medical cannabis. And so I completely understand. That's one thing I had passion about, was I went through all this without the help of somebody being like, this can help you, this, do that. That's for somebody like me who actually tried to use it medicinally in the past and figured it out in some way. I know I could do better, but that's where I can use my experience to help others and just, guiding them on it. It's microdosing of yourself, just using just small amounts to where you get to where you plateau. Learning that can be so beneficial to you just financially, instead of just blowing your mind out with a bong or a blunt. Even though you were good a quarter way in, you smoked the whole thing and there you are numb.
But I think also cannabis, so it kind of, one of the things that what you've said brings up is this idea of, too much cannabis. And what I think is interesting about cannabis, and I've heard this from a few people, is that, now, to qualify this before I start, there are always exceptions to every rule.
Always.
And there are plenty of people who have used cannabis in a way that is detrimental to their life. We've talked about that before. But a lot of times what I've heard from people using cannabis medicinally is that it doesn't have the same kind of draw that alcohol does. So
absolutely
in Scotland, so it's normal it is very drinking culture, and me not being a drinking, I don't drink alcohol, because my body doesn't handle it very well. I get really achy when I take alcohol. It hurts. I get an ache across my chest and down my arms. It's really weird. But so something in me doesn't process it very well. But what I've heard a lot of people say with alcohol is the more you drink, and I used to drink when I was younger, so I can kind of relate, but the more you drink, when you get to a certain point, you want to keep drinking more. And we can talk about triggering reward centers and all of that kind of stuff, but it gets complicated. So from a really basic level, one thing that my husband said one time is, he said, cannabis just isn't Moorish. And Moorish they use that term in the UK. So they'll say, oh, that chocolate was really Moorish. So it's like, you're like, ooh, I want more. But with cannabis, it doesn't tend to be quite so Moorish. You might want more, but you also can get to a point where you're like, yeah, I'm really good and I feel good and I'm happy with this level of, whether it's intoxication or stress relief or whatever it is, like, you can get to a really nice place. But I think it's about the relationship that you have with the plant. And I think this is another area where nurses are really well suited to help people find this. Because like you said, so many people have gone and it's been trial and error. And you're saying, okay, well, I don't have any guidance. What am I going to do? And that's how I felt when I first started out. I remember I had decided not to renew my nursing license. And, Virginia has this thing where if you don't renew it, you've got a certain amount of time, whether, I don't remember if it's a year or 2 years, where you can basically pay your back dues and, keep your license current. And I had decided, nah, I'm not going to do that. I'd let my license go. And then I started hearing about medical cannabis. And I was like, well, I like cannabis. I would like to use that for the chronic back pain that I've had since I worked in labor and delivery, and I'm very short, which you can't tell here, but I'm like, I always say 5'1.5", because that extra half, is important. Maybe a little more if I do my hair big, but so I spent all this time just bending over pregnant bellies and being short and not necessarily thinking. And if you're worried about the patient, you're trying to hear the baby's heartbeat, I just wasn't thinking about my own body mechanics. So I got a bulging disc in my back. It was really painful. It stopped me from working in labor and delivery. And that's when I got into teaching, actually. I was teaching nursing school clinicals. But I had this terrible back injury that has never quite been the same since. And sometimes it acts up. And I realized one day that I was in pain every day. And I had been grinning and bearing it. I had been doing all of my positive mental work, to not let the pain take over my life. And finally one day I was like, no, I'm in pain every day. And it's not getting better by, being more active or, eating an anti-inflammatory diet, all this stuff I wanted to do. So I saw this program for medical cannabis for nurses, and I was like, okay, I would really like to use pot to help my back feel better. But I was really scared of all the stuff we talked about before, of all of the, is it a gateway drug? Is there potential for abuse? Could it kill me if I take too much? Will it melt my brain and sizzle it like the egg on the frying pan? And so I remember saying to my husband, I was like, I think I want to reinstate my nursing license so that I can do this class. What do you think? And it was like a $3,000 class. It was 6 months full time. And I was like, I know that I'm not doing this because I'm not going to make a career out of it or anything. I'm not even working as a nurse. But how do you feel about me spending this money? And he was like, yeah, sure. You want to do it? Sure. Go for it. And he's really easygoing like
good
that.
Husband.
Yeah. Yeah. But then I got into it, and it's like, well, you can't get lung cancer from this? And nobody's ever died from taking too much cannabis? Mm-hmm. And that gateway drug thing, that was a myth? And I kept getting into it. And then I'm like, oh, well, I need to know more. And so I'm sitting there typing away, reading all the research papers. And because this was before we had a nursing textbook on cannabis. We had a nursing textbook that got published the year my course started. So I was like, great, we actually have a textbook, but I was teaching and I created my whole program from reading hundreds upon hundreds of, I don't even know how many research studies, and then starting to work with it, in real life. And it's like, cannabis is amazing. It does so many wonderful things. And then I was like, why didn't I know about this? You mean we've known about this since the 80s and nothing? Like, I got my nursing license in 2007. That was, I had other careers at that point, but I wanted to understand the body better. But here, this whole thing got missed out. It wasn't part of my training.
17 years after we discovered it.
17 years.
1990 is when we discovered the Endocannabinoid System. So that 2007, we would have known about it 17 years, and they still didn't teach you.
Well, but progress is slow, right? Because
that is true.
When I remember reading about Newtonian physics versus quantum physics, because I'm interested in all sorts of weird, freaky, cool things like quantum physics. Show me the things that you can't see, and I want to know more. But what they were saying was that Newtonian physics is basically what was taught, even though quantum physics was discovered and talked about in the early 1900s. Like, we were still being taught Newtonian physics in the 80s, and maybe we're getting some more of the quantum physics, but it takes a long time for there to be progress, typically, because you have to educate. You need to have, if you want to put endocannabinology into a medical school, you've got to have an endocannabinology department head. But if you don't have anybody who has spent their life studying it to be the department head.
That's true.
So there are lots of pieces.
Can they not just mention it? I mean, it kills me that when I'm at a hospital and I'm like, well, I use cannabis because of the endocannabinoid system, and you get nurses and doctors who've been working for 30 years go, what is that?
But also, to be very fair, the way that our nurses and doctors are expected to work is inhuman. I mean, if you have somebody who is supposed to be working a 24-hour shift, I mean, think about what air traffic controllers, because the understanding is that you're dealing with something that's life and death and could be very intense. You have to have a certain amount of break time. You can only work for so long, but we send doctors in for 24-hour shifts. Are you kidding me? And nurses, you want to talk about an exploited workforce. Nurses are chronically underpaid, just like teachers. So you have certain areas of society where we've decided it's not worth paying. And when do they have time? Because this is I used to think when I became a nurse, I was like, I'll work 3 days a week, 3 12-hour shifts. I mean, before that, I built my own business while working a corporate job. So I was working my corporate job 40 hours a week, which I managed to cram into 4 days. And that meant that I had 3 days that I could dedicate to building my own business. And I also was working on it, in the evenings. And, so I bootstrapped, I built my first business long before the days of people talking about getting investors for your business. I funded everything that I needed to do to get my business off the ground. And, and it was, I worked crazy hours, but I wasn't dealing with medications. There was no life and death, so I got into nursing and I was like 3 12-hour shifts a week. I'm going to have most of my time free. And I was exhausted because those 3 12-hour shifts were actually 15-hour days. And, so I spent 4 days recovering. So there are a lot of these, there's so much that goes into that whole picture and the way that we treat nurses and doctors. But I think that a big part of the problem beyond the stigma is that there's no time. That's not built in. We don't, as Americans, I don't think that we're very much hard work, lift yourself up by your bootstraps. That's kind of our national way of thinking. And when I came to the UK, I was shocked to learn that most jobs, if you get a job, most jobs will start you with 4 weeks of paid vacation a year. And that includes your job working as a cashier in the grocery store. You start with 4 weeks of paid vacation, and that's not talking about sick days. So, but, in America, you get your 2 weeks of vacation and you're like, all right, this is pretty good, right? But in the UK, it's normal for people to take off a month at a time. You're going to take off 6 weeks? Sure, no big deal. It's this more is always better thing. And I think there are a lot of other factors that go into it, like the amount of money that we have to pay for healthcare, all of the expenses, there's not really a good safety net in the US. So when you have people who are working really hard at jobs that are not paying very well, and maybe when you get to doctors, we're talking 24-hour shifts and stuff, they've got a different situation, sure. But I think the system is broken. And I think many of our systems are broken. And so I think it's a losing battle, honestly, but that's what we do expect. We expect the doctors and the nurses to figure it out on their own. And honestly, that's why I have a business, because the nurses are having to figure it out on their own. And they know that when they come to my program, they're going to learn everything that they need to know. They're going to be able to do it in alongside their work. They don't have to, because I wasn't working 6 months full time to study medical cannabis. And then I continued studying it, full time to create the course. But it's really difficult. And there are lots of courses out there that'll be, 3 hours, maybe a full day. Maybe you'll get 12 hours worth of training. My course is 13 weeks. It's 72 hours of continuing nursing education credits. It's intense. It's a lot because we're learning about the everything system, right? But it's important and it's needed. And so when I started, what I realized really quickly is that not only do nurses need the education, they also need to know how to create it into a viable business. And so I have my second year program is essentially, it's the practical applications. So I teach them how to build a business, how to actually make money doing this work that's incredibly needed, because people aren't getting it, and they don't have time to go back to school. So I've been impressed with all of the nurses. I've had over 100 nurses go through my program, and that's just been in 2.5 years. So I'm really, really proud of that. And my nurses are award winners. Like they're out there winning awards by their peers. Like it's an amazing group of nurses. And I think that, as more nurses get educated, there will be more nurses who will want to learn. Doctors, I don't know. Doctors and nurses are typically different personalities. And doctors,
they are.
We practice is different.
They're both needed. So this is what I said to Janet. This is why Jana and Dr. Goldstein, I thought, were a great duo, is because doctors aren't personable. They look at it's what they do. They're like lawyers. They don't have much of it's all about numbers, looking at what's going on. The more personable they get, the more that they connect with the patient. And I think that they want, I know it's not the same, but as a combat veteran, the more that when you're in a combat area and you keep getting new guys coming in, you start distancing yourself because you don't know how long you're going to have with that person. The more you dehumanize them, the easier it is. And I think that that's a thing that doctors will do, even if they don't know they're doing it. Nurses are personable. They bring it to a personable level. And that's one reason why they are, there are a lot of reasons why they are abused, but I think one reason is doctors just have a hard time dealing with the patient. So they have the nurse do so much, but then she's doing half the doctor's work for her own pay.
Yeah.
I've seen it.
It's definitely, I became a nurse when I was all idealistic. I thought I can change the system from inside, right? Like sometimes we believe that. We think, okay, I can come in and I can help make it better. And I think what happens is that over time, we just get worn down. And for me, I wasn't willing to get worn down. So, and then I had the back injury, which helped make it really clear that I was moving away from that. But it's hard.
You're also abused when you try harder. When you try to do something and you're like, I'm going to work really hard to show them that I'm doing. They don't give a flying fuck. They don't. All they see is, I can make her do more for less. That is all they see.
Yeah, well, and that's, I think, where I think the personality, the sort of temperament and the expectations of nurses is often, it's where it does hurt us, because a lot of times we haven't learned how to stand up for ourselves. We didn't necessarily have that modeled for us in society. I think we still don't really have a lot of healthy behaviors modeled for us in society. What makes a good movie or a good TV show are people who are really dysfunctional. My husband always laughs about romantic comedies. He's like, if you really think about those things,
I hate those shit.
They're stalking somebody, but because they're cute and charming, it's okay. Like the behaviors are not realistic. But
it's not even that. It's the drama. People want that drama, and then they'll go in their lives, I don't want the drama. And I go, yes, you do. You couldn't survive without the drama.
But it takes some, I think, some growth to find that. Cause I think we probably all go through phases of our lives where we like the drama. We go through those points where it's like, yeah, I'm happy to be in a relationship where there's lots of fighting because it's exciting. Like we think things that are warped. They're a little distorted, but it's because it's what we've seen. It's what was modeled for us. And, it's again, that call to go back to the basics. Like, well, okay, so romantic comedies, that's not the kind of relationship you really want to have. It looks good for a minute, might be exciting when it all works out. But in reality, like, I don't want to live a up and down roller coaster of emotions. And, but if you go back to the basics, like, what do you really want? You want to connect with somebody that you enjoy talking to. You want to enjoy being in somebody's presence. You want to feel valued and appreciated. It's a basic thing, just like our connection to nature, just like using herbs to heal ourselves. I had a realization one time. I've done a lot of plant medicine over the years, and I've studied it. I've worked with it professionally, all different types and varieties, and I had a realization one day that there was no difference really between the mint that I was chewing on to help my nausea that I had and the strawberry that fed me and made me remember summer and feel good about it, and the cannabis or the psilocybin or these other things. We have so much plant medicine available to us. We can eat it. Let food be thy medicine. We have this amazing world. And if we could stop trying to conquer it, if we could stop thinking that our job is to manage and rule over the world, because that's philosophically, that's kind of what you were talking about earlier, right? That we have this idea that we're going to come in, we're going to conquer, we're going to dominate, we're going to rule the world. And that comes from, I think, the, sort of this religious idea of, Earth was created as a playground for humans.
I also think that no matter what, you're going to have someone. This is the dangers of it, and this is why I believe you need men like, let's say, I don't want to say like me, but men that, like, let's say, that know violence, but also know how to keep it in check. And that's where we get so worried, is the more that we come together, the more that we become peaceful. It does not matter. There will come a man, or there will come a person, woman or man, who sees that they can take advantage of that. Mm-hmm. And that's where I agree that it is religious, but I mean, in every aspect of every civilization, be it what they believed, you have evil people who want to do evil on others. And it's something that we have in our world. It's even we have animals that will get like that. I mean, when you see a leopard and they have a baby deer, all they have to do is kill it and take it back to some of them will play with them. They mess with their heads, they will let them think they get away, catch them, and keep doing it over and over and over until it's really messed up. It's just in nature. You will have something that wants to create harm. And that's where it's dangerous I think to just, I want everyone to have peace, but you also need to be aware that there will be people who don't want peace.
Well, I think it's about healthy boundaries, right? I mean, because most of us aren't dealing with somebody that's going to actually try and, come and, kill us and take our cattle. Like, most of us aren't, because I think of, like, so where I am in the world, you hear a lot of the old stories from back in the days where, there were cattle thefts, and you'd go and you'd raid the next village or, something like that. Most of us are not in those kind of life or death situations. I mean, some people are, but most of the people that are listening to this that have good access to YouTube and internet and all of those things, most of us are not in a life and death situation. So in those cases where there's somebody who's trying to take advantage, somebody who wants to exploit other people, I think in those cases, it's really about having good boundaries and self-knowledge and awareness. Because when we can say, it seems like you're trying to take this thing that I've got in my hand right here, but this is mine and I don't want to give it to you, so I'm not going to. Like, to be able to say that rather than to get into a fight with somebody over, you're trying to take this paper out of my hand. And, like, most of these things we come up with in our daily life aren't necessarily fist fights that we get into or things where we're in bodily danger. So being able to find ways to I think, to stand up for ourselves and to be be really calm and centered and grounded, and to be able to say, no, I'm not going to tolerate that kind of behavior. I think that's a skill. And I think the more that we grow and develop ourselves, the better able we all are to have those healthy boundaries and to be able to live in a way that honors ourselves, as well as being kind and compassionate to other people. Because you're right, there are definitely lots of nurses are leaving the field because of the way they've been treated. I mean, and that's always been the case, but obviously, post global pandemic, it's a lot worse than in most of our life memories. So that's one of the things that I love about cannabis too. And I love how it's so suited for nurse leadership, because nurses, we're the most trusted profession. Nurses are known for being ethical, for valuing people, for being non-judgmental. And so when you have a group of people that can step in and that can educate and that can help to remove the stigma, to relieve the stigma, because sometimes, as much as you want to believe something, you don't necessarily believe it until somebody in authority tells you, right? Until I read the studies that showed that actually smoking cannabis does not lead to lung cancer, or does not have the same correlation with lung cancer as smoking tobacco does. As soon as I read that, I was like, okay, there's an authority that I believe that's telling me this. Wow, okay, this is pretty cool. And so if nurses can be that authority, we can help so many people. And I think a lot of people could be really well and could have really healthy, happy lives with some nurse guidance, because we've studied these things. We've looked at how you live, how the way our stress level impacts our health. We've looked at these kind of things. And there are some places where you really need a doctor. You want somebody who is going to ignore the person and look at the tiny details on a molecular level or on a chemical level, or somebody who knows exactly where the right place is in the brain that you have to do whatever you have to do in brain surgery. If health and wellness could be the focus instead of, the sick care system that we have, then nurses are in a great position. Bud tenders are great. Like a lot of nurses get upset about bud tenders sort of being the face of cannabis. Because if you're a new person to using cannabis, you go into the dispensary. If you're, a 65-year-old woman, and you're getting your advice from the bud tender who is a 21-year-old kid who's got piercings and tattoos, and maybe you feel a little uncomfortable because generationally that's a little different than you're used to, you're going to have a harder time connecting with the bud tender. And a lot of times bud tenders are excited about cannabis and the way they use it.
A video very early on where I said, is THC everything? And I was just going through what I saw with cannabis and what I was thinking, and everyone was getting on there. Your theory's right. It's called the entourage effect. Everyone knows about it. And so that's where I started looking into the entourage effect. And I completely agree with you.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. It's over here in the UK, they have a medical model. So essentially the way that it works is you see a doctor, a specialist doctor, you pay for your visit, you have a consultation, and then they prescribe you a specific flower, or it could be flour, it could be oils, but they prescribe you a specific product, and then you get it through a mail order pharmacy.
I don't like that.
I know. I like being able to walk into a dispensary. We don't have information about terpenes here. Sometimes you can sort of get it, but it's not one of the things that's measured, that's known about every strain. So it's I don't love that as a system, but for patients who have really complex medical needs and that are on a lot of other medications, I actually think it's pretty good, because then you have a doctor who can manage the complexities and look at the drug interactions. But for the majority of people,
that's okay. The thing that kills me is how much they can differ between different people. And that's what gets me, is like, I can go on and see, okay, this strain says it's energetic, it's relaxed, it's going to do this for me, it's going to do that. And I'll smoke it and it does the exact opposite for me. I've watched some people, this makes me have the munchies. For me, I don't want to eat on it. And that's where it's, if they're watching it interact and they're getting that, the thing that gets me is saying, this is what flower I think you should have, and give it to them. I think that they should have access to several different, at least, possibilities rather than just one. That's where my issue comes with that.
Yeah. I mean, we do. So there's a website, it's MedBud Wiki, and something like that, but it's basically in the UK, and it lists all of the different medical cannabis chemovars and products that are available. Mm-hmm. So you can go and you can look at that. And I've done searching for myself, because I'm like, it's hard to find stuff with linalool in it. And I really like I used to love Granddaddy Purple. That was one of my favorites when I was in Maryland, and I could get it regularly. It was really relaxing and soothing, and I just enjoyed it. But over here, everything was focused on beta-caryophyllene, myrcene, and limonene. We had some that had some pinenes, but the options they're limited. And you don't get to, go, and you don't have the visceral experience that you get when you go into a dispensary. But I can also see the benefit of that with complex patients. But I really do think for the rest of the population, most of the people that are using cannabis, if you're not on any other medication, well, then it's really great to work with a nurse, to have somebody that can help you to figure out, what do you like? What didn't you like? How can you tune in your medical use so that you're using it so that you're functional in your life? Because a lot of people, if you have to drive, well, you can't take THC. You can't have something with THC in it and then go and drive if you're intoxicated. But some people need THC during the day. So figuring out all of these complexities, I mean, nurses are, I can't think of another profession that is better suited to it, but we just don't have critical mass yet. And, I'm hoping that I'll get there. Last year I created a collaborative to help mentor my students in this second year program that I have. And we have some amazing, amazing people in this field, but everybody's spread out. So it takes doing things differently. It takes a different approach. But there's nobody better suited to do this than nurses. There's nobody who can connect with patients the way that nurses can. Even when you talk about psychedelics, nurses know how to be with people. There's a lot of trainings for psychedelics on how to become a sitter. And that's somebody who helps to facilitate the experience, who helps to be there as a support to the person who's in it. I know you know these things, but just in case somebody listens.
No, you're good. You're good. I know the game. No worries.
Yeah. But so I know nurses that are involved in clinical. One of my mentors is actually involved in clinical research with psilocybin. And, and she talks about how she did all the trainings to become a sitter and that sort of thing. And, for nurses, it's something that we do. It's just like coaching. I've been a nurse coach. I was one of the first ever nurse coaching graduates. I was in the second cohort of the very first nurse coaching program. And I'd been doing coaching for probably a decade before that, maybe even more. But coaching is it's a paradigm that works with nurses, because we sit with people and we listen to them and we ask them questions and we relate to them and we get to understand them. And when you have somebody that can help you navigate, because there are issues with medical cannabis, there can be interactions with medications, there can be adverse effects. People can just not tolerate cannabis. There can be situations where cannabis isn't the right thing. But you have a nurse on your side? I mean, what's better than that? Like, everybody knows the nurses are the ones who are going to be behind you. They're the ones that are going to help you. And so when I created my program, I was like, nurses need options. They need to understand this. And whether they're going back to the bedside or whether they're going to go out and start their own practice, which a lot of my nurses have done, they need to be empowered to do that. And when nurses are empowered and when nurses are working in this way, the whole community benefits.
Mm-hmm. And it lends a medical professional credibility to what people are saying. Like I can get on here and talk all day long, and maybe I can help facilitate some people. But I mean, people aren't going to listen to me and go, okay, he knows what he's talking. I'm going to listen to him. I put in all of my videos and my descriptions. There's always links to the stuff I'm saying so you can see it, but there's only so much that I can do. And that's why I really enjoy having nurses and medical professionals and other cannabis professionals, just to show that that was one thing, was like when people were saying entourage effect, that's real. And I try to tell other people, nobody cares what I'm saying. And that's why it's nice to have somebody who's got a degree, a nurse, who comes on and goes, you're right. What you're saying is right. And I go, oh, okay, he's not as big of an idiot as we think.
But I mean, but that's the thing. Cannabis, it's the people's plant, right? What you know about it. And I've told you this before, I really enjoyed your history of cannabis session. Because it's a lot more fun to watch it and to see the pictures and to be able to connect the dots than it is to just read about it. And we need more people breaking the stigmas. I have a certain perspective as a nurse, as a teacher, as an educator, as a whatever, but that doesn't make me, it means that I know more about some things, but maybe less about others. And so I think that's why we need the communities. We need to open source our knowledge and our ways of thinking even.
And we need to push it back. Like what everyone goes to is they say 2000, 3000 BC, we've been using cannabis as a medicine. And I'm like, yes, recorded. That's where we go to Fuxi in China, the first emperor. He's the first writings on medicinal cannabis. However, we have evidence of cannabis linen in 7000 BC, and then we have evidence of hemp cord in 10,000 BC. And what do you think? They just look, oh, this flower, we're not going to use that, and threw it away? Yeah. Is that what you really think?
But the evidence for cannabis predates written language. I mean, we have I always remember the Siberian ice princess story, and she was found, mummified in ice, basically. Like, I don't think she was mummified but her body was perfectly preserved, and that she had evidence of breast cancer, and she had cannabis buried with her. And, so I think I always...
What is that date to?
I don't remember, but I remember that the dates go back before written history. Before
I know 10,000 BC is before written history. Mm-hmm. And that's why that was in Taiwan, I think, the island of Taiwan in China. They found hemp cord on a pottery, and that dated to 10,000 BC. They also found a stone beater that they believe they were using to pound the hemp cord or the hemp fibers down into whatnot. Anyway, but then after that, the next one we have is 7,000 BC or 8,000 BC, and that's in Turkey. And that was a baby, the remains of a baby wrapped in a hemp shroud. Mm-hmm. And so they had hemp linen back then. So obviously, and I mean, they made linen with it and said, like flour doesn't do shit for us. We're not even going to try to use it. Sorry, but when you had things back then, you used every single thing you could until you couldn't use it anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when you have to forage or you have to gather it, I think this is where connecting with nature gives us so many benefits, because it helps us to appreciate things. Like you were talking about hunters and hunters being environmentalists. I think it's really important to know where your food comes from. My parents raised chickens, and they had somebody that was they raised chickens for eggs, but also for meat. And I mean, this is like something they started after they were retired. So, but I remember I helped the first time they did it. I helped with the slaughtering of the chickens, and it was. I'm not somebody who is ever like, I could never have been in military or any kind of fighting. Like I'm very tenderhearted. But when it came to this with the chickens, I felt like if I'm going to eat animal products, that it would not hurt me to experience the actual taking of a life of a chicken that I was going to eat. And, as a way of honoring you read about cultures where, there's a prayer said over the dead animal, and this is lots of indigenous cultures. And it was a hard thing to do, but it also made me really clear on why I don't want to waste food, especially animal foods, because this is a living thing that gave its life so that I could eat. And it had a good life up until this point and all of the things, and it was killed as humanely and quickly as possible. And it's not something that I want to do more of, but there's value in understanding how connected we are to everything, that we are nature. And so just like you said, when you're doing these things, when you're raising your own animals or you're growing your own foods, when you see how much work it is, like just from the labor perspective alone. I mean, my husband grew Brussels sprouts and they had all these big leaves and we were like, can you eat these? I don't know. Not the gigantic ones, because Brussels sprouts, cabbages, like cauliflower, they're huge. You have to give them like 3 feet space when you plant them. So the really big leaves, not so good to eat. But after all the time that went into growing the Brussels sprouts and the cauliflowers, I'm like, well, these leaves look edible. This part, it looks like we can eat, because you don't want to waste something that you've spent so much time nurturing to grow. And
that's where they all go, hey, let's get Jerry over here. And they all get a notepad. Hey, Jerry, go ahead and eat that. Let's see how this goes. Okay. That's how you figured out how you would try it. You wouldn't just let it go.
Yeah. I mean, and then when you think about things that are fragrant, right? So you think about, well, how does that, okay, so maybe you'd eat it, but you wouldn't get high from eating cannabis flower because it's just got the THCA.
Right.
But you think about herbs and cooking. Well, if you throw some herbs on the fire and then you're like, ooh, I'm having a lot of fun cooking tonight. You might go, well, maybe let me throw some more of these herbs on the fire. Let me see what else that does. So it's experimentation. And, if you're not distracted by flashing neon lights and video games and, sort of all the modern trappings, you would try stuff out. Because what else are you going to do?
No, totally. And then like the mushrooms. I mean, think about the Siberians. They say the one reason they believe that they really truly thrived in Siberia or Arctic settings is the Amanita muscaria, and that because of the dissociative effects that I think it's a different chemical than psilocybin that's in Amanita muscaria. I could be wrong, but it's it's a lot more dissociative, so you can kind of you don't feel the pain as much, and that's something that I found really interesting. And then finding out that if you eat Amanita muscaria and then you go and take a piss outside or a whiz, sorry, like they say that if there are reindeer around, they will push you down to get to your pee. They love Amanita muscaria so much.
Recognize that we're part of the whole.
One thing that I find is so cool is that they said there was an ancient civilization that circumvented the globe before, like a long time ago. And they say that they couldn't do that. One reason people say that is they would use flax sails, and flax sails, when they would do that, would deteriorate within weeks because of the salt air.
Yeah.
And that's where hemp sails allowed people to actually circumvent the globe because they wouldn't deteriorate. However, we believe that hemp sails became a thing around 1000 AD with the Vikings and Europe. However, in ancient Rome in 72 AD, we have just a part of a remnants from Licinius. I can't remember his name. It's in my histories. But he says that we know of hemp rope and hemp sails. And so I was like, wait, what? A whole 1,000 years before we're supposedly have to know that? And there are images of Egyptian, like, huge ships that we don't even see now that they believe possibly, if they had hemp sails, could have circumvented the globe. So It's just really interesting to find out all that and how much cannabis really aided in just the exploration of the globe. The Vikings, they wouldn't have been able to do what they did without their hemp sales and hemp rope.
Mm-hmm.
It's just amazing.
Yeah.
I'm such a nerd about history.
I love it. Well, I mean, but we learn a lot from it too. You know, that's one of the complaints that you always hear about medical cannabis. We don't have enough studies. Well, the last I looked, there was like 70,000 studies on PubMed, which is our database of, you know, medical and scientific studies. And, I always say the reason that we say we don't have enough evidence is
there's no U.S. federal studies, so we don't know.
Well, but I mean, there's people still say that, and you know, I mean, studies happening around the world. People don't know how much research there is about cannabis. Like that's the biggest thing. But also, we don't know how much when you look at something like lavender, we pretty much know what lavender does. It's relaxing, it's calming, it's soothing. It has some mild anti-inflammatory effects. Antihistamine effects. Might have anti-inflammatory, I don't know. But I know it works as a mild antihistamine. And mostly people think lavender, it's relaxing. You know, you have a little lavender essential oil, you smell it, maybe it'll help take headache away, things like that. We know what lavender does. We're pretty comfortable. If you're somebody who knows about plant medicine, we're pretty comfortable with what lavender does and how it's used. But lavender does like one thing. When you're talking about cannabis, you're talking about the master regulatory system of the entire body. So like we have studies on tons of different things, tons of different studies, but we don't have the super detailed studies in just one area because everyone's interested in different things about cannabis. You have people that are interested in cannabis for endometriosis. They're not the same people that are studying cannabis for Alzheimer's. You know, there are all of these different areas, and it's just like we have access to them all now because we realize that we're dealing with the endocannabinoid system. You're dealing with the system that governs all the other systems. So there's tons of research out there, but it's still not as much as we want there to be. Because we want to know everything. And, you know, maybe at some point we will. I don't know if I believe that's possible, but I could be wrong. I mean, it's...
it'd be nice. That's what I tell people. I want to be wrong. I don't want to be right about half the stuff that I say. I just feel like that's what it's going to be. I think cannabis will be legalized within 5 years on a federal level, but the only reason it will be is because they see that Europe is doing it and they don't want to miss out on those tax dollars.
There's a lot of money to be made in cannabis, and that's, I think...
And they'll realize it.
I think that's what drives everything. I mean, the way our society is set up. Here in the UK, when I was in nursing school, I did some teaching of the undergraduates. When I was in graduate school, I did some teaching and tutoring of the undergraduates. And I was impressed with how much of their curriculum had to do with health promotion. So it's all about how to keep people well. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. And then I thought about it for, you know, maybe 20 minutes and I went, okay, I get it now. So in the UK, they have the National Health System or the National Health Service. And so that is the scary thing that we don't like to hear about in America, socialized medicine. Ah! So basically what it means is that some of your tax dollars pay for the medical care, and everyone has access to medical care. And if I go and I get a prescription, I don't have to pay for it, except for there are certain prescriptions you do have to pay for, but also you can get private medical care if you want to pay for extra or you want some sort of an elective procedure or whatever. But essentially, this system does better when people are healthy. And in America, of course, the system makes money when people are sick. So it's really clear that if you follow the money, you know, and I think that's public opinion. I would like to think that it's public opinion and that people are learning more and knowing more, but I don't quite have that level of faith in government. You know, but I think money is what tips it over the edge. As people are seeing that there's a lot of money to be made and we saw that with the hemp farm bill and the senators and the politicians who were doing really well off their hemp farms suddenly because the 2018 farm bill meant they could grow a lot more, you know, and it's
It's how outrageous that is, that you go to a store here in America and it will say that we can't sell you any cannabis products here. However, here's some hemp-derived Delta-9 THC if you'd like it. I'm like, what's the point? If you can sell that, so you could create one chemically and possibly have residues that will harm you, but the natural one, that's too bad.
Yeah,
the one that won't harm you.
Yeah, Delta-8 is
they have Delta-9 hemp derived now, not just Delta-8.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's the concern is that's crazy to me that they can actually do that. Because essentially, even if you're converting
it's chemically the same thing. It's chemically the same thing.
But it's made in a way that can be dangerous, and it can leave solvents, and you can have residues, and that's what
I want people to know. The way that it can be dangerous, it's not necessary. It's not the chemical itself. So they change it to be identical to THC. It's what they use and the residues left behind. I mean, I've been part of it. I've seen the chemicals used. I've seen you have to have 15 different respirators and vents pulling these chemicals out because they will kill you.
Yeah.
And it's pretty disgusting to think about it. And then they're like, I've seen test results from different places, and let's just say they weren't as clean as they said they were.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. It's not quite the same as getting it on the illicit market, but there have been studies about the labeling. Is the labeling accurate? And that's one of the concerns. Are they lab testing? Is everything lab tested? Everything that you put in your body, you should know that.
Just because it's lab tested doesn't mean shit. They can pay lab testers. Yeah. I've seen it happen. Well, doesn't always mean it. There are some good labs, but I'm just saying.
Yeah, I mean,
don't want to just go off of it.
Yeah, anything can be faked, right? Anything I mean, how do we believe anything? Everything can be faked. So you have to kind of
and it's less likely that it will happen if we could grow it ourselves. That's the thing. I want people to be able to have businesses, but if we could grow it ourselves, they would be held to a higher freaking standard.
Well, I mean, I think people should be able to grow yourself. It's one of the things I don't like in the UK. They don't have grow your own laws. And I think that they should, because access for patients is an issue. Cannabis is expensive. So whether you're buying it in the US or the UK or anywhere else around the world, if it's not, most of our medical expenses get covered by some sort of health insurance, or here they get covered by the NHS. Well, cannabis always falls outside of that, or at least it has so far. Hopefully we'll get to a point where it won't. But for patients, access is an issue. And if patients could grow their own, I have big concerns about illicit cannabis and part of it may be because I grew up learning that, you hear stories about, the cocaine mixed with plaster dust or, whatever kinds of, bad drugs. There's always something bad mixed with it. But I mean, it makes sense. If you have something and you want to stretch it further, well, you mix some other stuff in there with it. And if you're unscrupulous, then you don't care, so you send it out there. So I've heard stories of CBD flower being sprayed with spice or K2. And so it looks like cannabis. It smokes like cannabis. But what you're getting is a chemical synthetic that, as we talked about before, it opens that door wide and leaves you lots of potential damage. But not only that, even if you get, actual cannabis, you don't know what it's grown in. And cannabis, this is the thing. Cannabis is an amazing plant for so many reasons. And one more reason is that cannabis is excellent at cleaning the soil. And I was
about to say that. It can suck radiation out of the soil. So what is it doing to the plant?
That was one of the other things that just blew my mind. If you don't know this, those of you that are watching, Google it, or, whatever your search engine of choice is. But cannabis was actually planted. They planted hemp around the site of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster because it was so good at pulling that radioactive material out of the soil. So that's really great if you're trying to clean up the soil. If you're using that cannabis flower, something that came from that plant, where's it going to go? It all goes into the plant. So it is really, really critical that the cannabis that we're consuming is organic. And, you know, there's a lot of complaints about the organic industry. It's tough to get the organic licensure. I've heard that from food for decades. So when I hear it with cannabis, I'm like, nope, sorry, I don't care. Because there are lots of people that are doing things organically and they go and they get the labels. And I know that it's hard for smaller businesses, but if it's really important to you, you do the things. And I think organic is really important. And it's especially important in cannabis because you're talking about something that you're putting in your body. We have all of those stories about, you know, the studies and the things that say cannabis is linked to psychosis. Well, the research is out. That's what the old research said, that there was this connection, and people used to be afraid that if you would use cannabis, it could make you psychotic. I think
I remember Anslinger helped with that.
Yep. But also, I have a lot of questions about those studies. Did anybody test the cannabis? Do we know that the cannabis wasn't contaminated with radioactive material, heavy metals? Because heavy metal poisoning can also be linked with psychosis. So if you're using cannabis that has been grown who knows how, who knows where, but is somehow contaminated and toxic, you put that into your brain, what do you think is going to happen? You put it into your lungs, what do you think is going to happen? We know these things are toxic, but if you're getting it on the illicit market, then you don't know what you're getting. And in those situations, I would much rather see patients growing their own, because you can find out how to do that online. Whether it's legal or not, that's a choice that you have to make. And it shouldn't be a choice that you have to make. It should be, you have access to it. It's a plant. But it's why all of these pieces are so critical. And if, you know, I mean, we've got messes to clean up. We need to. But the more people that we have educated, the more people that understand how wonderful this medicine can be. And no, it's not for everybody, but it's a beautiful plant-based medicine that can help a lot of people. And even if it did nothing else but reduce stress and make people feel happy, I would argue that there is a huge health benefit to that. A huge one. To be happy, to be calm. We know that makes us healthier. We know that.
Have you ever heard of the root system of cannabis being medicinal?
I have, actually. I was just reading the other day about gout. So, it's something that I'm really interested in finding out more about, because I don't know a lot about it, but the cannabis root used to be used for gout, and gout is something that there's not a lot of other studies about it. It's, you know, I mean, we can talk about arthritis, inflammatory pain conditions, things like that. But cannabis root has been used historically for gout. And gout is something
do you know who made that popular?
No, who? Interesting. That's very cool. Yeah. I mean, there's so much.
I've wanted to try it myself, because my freaking knees and my joints are so bad from overseas. So I'd love to try it out.
Yeah.
I haven't yet, though.
Yeah. You know who would be good to talk to about that would be Jana, because now that she's an herbalist, you know, she knows a lot more about traditional medicine preparations too. It definitely would be something that would be interesting to hear about more, because I think
I'll be a guinea pig.
Could probably, I mean, you know, I can't imagine it would be too hard to figure it out. Grow a plant, use the roots. Maybe eventually we'll have.
I wonder if how it would differ if it's what's in the soil, because there's no cannabinoids in the root system. So what is it? That's what I'd like to find out. Maybe it is cannabis, but I mean in the stock, you're not getting any cannabinoids, so I can't imagine the root system having any. But
we do get a lot of good minerals and stuff. If you think about root vegetables and what grows in the soil, and think about something like ginger can be incredibly medicinal, kills all sorts of bacteria. I think ginger is also an antifungal, maybe antiviral, I can't remember. But ginger is something that is really good for us, and it's a root that we grow. And you know, I mean, there's essential oils in there. I don't know what else would be like. I mean, I'm sure I know the terpenes tend to be on the leaves and stuff because they're the plant's natural defense system. But I don't know what kind of.
I know. Isn't that crazy? That's why I love to find out. And just the fact that he figured this out so long ago, and still we're figuring out that, yes, that is possibly a medicinal value. And in 72 AD, he was talking about it.
Yeah. Well, and this, I think, factors into, what we call real world evidence. We have it's anecdotal evidence. It's written historical documents, but when you say anecdotal evidence, it implies, well, it's a story that you were told. It was an anecdote. There's a little bit of a, like you can kind of see the randomized control trial, hardcore double blind scientists who like that going, well, it's anecdotal. That means it's a story. So I don't buy that. But what I love is over here in the UK and in Europe, they talk a lot about, that's the term they use, is real world evidence. And we have a lot of real world evidence with cannabis. We don't know everything. We don't know if it's safe to use during pregnancy. Lots of people are using it during pregnancy. They think it's natural. It's an herb. It could be that it's fine. It could be that it's a better choice. When I was really, really sick during my pregnancy. And so I was given anti-nausea meds that were category C, which means we think it's fine, but we don't know if it could cause any birth defects or things like that. So we use medicines all the time that we don't know if they're actually safe, because it seems like on a risk-reward basis, it seems like the risk is worth the reward that we're going to get from it. So
there was just a study that came out on that, wasn't there? I believe Megan Bang did a little video on it about how it shows that using at least edibles is not detrimental as we thought to pregnancy. And I know very many people who have used cannabis while pregnant, both edible or smoking, and babies were absolutely fine. I don't want to sit here and say you should use cannabis. Like she said, I'm no medical professional, but from what I've seen in my evidence, I would probably, with my own wife, not tell her to do that. Although my wife has CHS, so I don't have to worry about it. So,
well, I haven't heard of that study, so I'm going to look and see. I know that there was one that came out recently within the last few years that, look, because what they used to say is they used to link it to low birth weight and some developmental milestones. They used to say it could be potentially damaging. But there were studies that came out in the 80s with Melanie Drehurst. She was a nurse who was down in Jamaica. And when she was studying it in Jamaica, what was nice was it was a place where the stigma was different. There wasn't the same kind of stigma about cannabis use. So she was able to study it in a different way, and from her studies, the babies pretty much turned out fine. They didn't have the issues with low birth weight and things like that. Where I urge caution is the same way that you would urge caution with any sort of pregnant person is, we don't know everything. We're not omniscient. So make the best choice that you can and look at the risk and rewards. And quite honestly, like, I was on a wide variety of anti-nausea meds when I was pregnant. As I know, I've told you, I had miscarriages. We had a couple of rounds of IVF. Like, I was miserable during my pregnancy, but I did everything I could to make the best choices in any moment. And I think had I known everything that I know now, I think rather than taking the pharmaceuticals, I think I probably would have opted for cannabis. But I can't say that for sure. And it was really hard for me to get pregnant. So I might also say, you know what? I don't know what cannabis is going to do. And we don't have research that is really clear one way or the other. And it's unethical to do the kind of research where you think you could potentially cause harm. So we have to do different types of studies, like observational studies and studies where people are basically reporting the things that they've already chosen to do. You're not, but if you think something could be harmful, you can't give it to a pregnant person or a child, because ethically, if there's a chance that that thing is going to do harm, I mean, unless you think it's really unlikely, it's a hard sell to get past an ethics board. So, you know, it's hard to say because everything I know now, if I knew that all then, you know, but even if that were the case, you know, I didn't have access to, you know, medical grade lab tested cannabis. So even if I had, you know, it's a really tricky situation. And I think people have to make their own decisions, but they need to be educated so that they can make the best decision possible. And again, that's why I always come back to nurses. That's why we need nurses doing this. Because nurses are the ones that people always tell the things that they're too embarrassed or ashamed or worried to tell the doctors, you know? And if we can have these dialogues, if we can do research with real world evidence, then maybe we can one day say, you know what, over these last several decades, all of these observational studies, because the issue with studies with pregnancy is that a lot of times you need the longitudinal, you need a lot of time. So the question isn't just, does the baby survive the pregnancy? The question is also, do they have developmental problems, you know, when they're 2 or when they're 5, or does something go wrong when they're a teenager? And we don't know these things. And so it's a risk reward. You have to sort of weigh it up for yourself. And that's where I think our job as nurses is to educate patients, to really have these honest conversations, to talk with people and go, well, this is what the research says. I'm not going to judge you either way. I don't know 100%, but here's the information so you can make the best decision you can.
This is what I want other people to think about. Now, if you're not using cannabis or you don't need it, I would always suggest, if you don't need something, don't use it. Let your baby grow and grow the way you would want to develop without aid of anything. However, and this is something Jana, she hasn't said this specifically, but it's something she said that helped me corroborate what I was saying. And she said, think about before 1937, we were feeding cannabis seed to our animals, to our livestock, all of this. So we were getting cannabinoids in our diets, all of this. We were getting influxes of cannabinoids, terpenes, all of that. And so that's where I would have to say is, it seems like it could be, it wouldn't be detrimental because we used to always have cannabis in our systems when we were having babies. However, that's very different than doing an edible where it has an emulsifier or something like that. And a lot of people, if you don't know what an emulsifier is, like she was saying, if you have cannabis oil, it takes a long time to, work and react in your system. Your THC is going to be working. However, there's very little of it. Most of it is an acid and it's not going to affect you. However, when you have an emulsifier and you have activated THC, the emulsifier will allow the THC to work faster. And that's where you can get a high within 45 minutes to an hour, typically with a regular emulsifier. Now we have nano emulsifiers that can happen within 10 to 15 minutes.
Yeah. So, and I think the more that we change the plant, that's where I get more nervous. I mean, I think when we start to get into the nano formulations and liposomal formulations, things like that, I'm all for, like, you're gonna infuse your olive oil or your MCT oil or whatever. You're gonna infuse that with the cannabis. You're gonna use that as your extraction method. You're gonna get all of that lovely stuff into the oil. When we start messing around with stuff, I think that's where we have potential for danger. I mean, there was the study. I know Jenna talks about it a lot, so you may have already heard about this, and it may have already been on your show, so I apologize if so, but there was a case study with a patient who died from a side effect of a drug called meloxicam, which is it's a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, and there's a side effect that is it's a known side effect, and the woman had been taking the meloxicam for 5 years, and so normally when somebody has a bad reaction to a drug, you look at, okay, well, what was new? What caused this reaction? Because if the reaction is new, something must have changed that you suddenly have this reaction. And so what came out was she had used CBD previously without any problem. But recently she had started using a liposomal CBD product. So what the researchers concluded at the end of their article, this patient unfortunately died from the side effects, which again are known side effects of one of the pharmaceuticals she was on, but they dismissed they said that they didn't think that was what caused it because she'd been on the medicine for 5 years. So you have this patient, she's stable on this medication. The only new thing that they looked at was this liposomal CBD. And liposomal basically is a method of drug delivery. It makes it more bioavailable so the body can use it more easily. And when we talk about drug interactions, if CBD it's known to have a long half-life, which means that the half-life is how long is it going to take before half of it is processed out of your system. So the half-life of CBD is estimated 18 to 32 hours. But with a liposomal format, that might be different. With a liposomal format that makes it more bioavailable, then you could have more competition in the liver for the processing of these medications. So what happens sometimes is you'll end up with more of the other medication in your bloodstream. So what I think probably happened is, and I'm not saying that I'm any wiser than the people who wrote the study, but what they concluded in the study was that maybe there was a contaminant or something in the CBD product that she used that caused this reaction. But the product that she used wasn't lab tested, so they couldn't verify one way or the other. So it could have been that it was contaminated. It could have been some other freak thing that was never identified. Or it could have possibly been that this enhanced, more bioavailable formula, this liposomal format, interfered because there was competition in the liver. So there's competition for processing. Your liver can only do so much. So then if she had more of this meloxicam in her system than her body could handle, and that's a known side effect of this drug, it was Stevens-Johnson syndrome and toxic endodermic necrolytis or something. But essentially she had these reactions, and the only thing new that they could identify was the liposomal CBD. Previous CBD hadn't been a problem before. And so that's where I'm concerned about liposomal formats, nano formats, things where we're taking it away from nature. We're changing the formula.
Why weren't they using sunflower lecithin?
I have no idea. I mean,
because that's a natural emulsifier.
Well, but when it's a liposomal format, my understanding is that I don't know exactly how I know it's sometimes with the nano products, sometimes it's like a process of vibration where they're breaking up the molecules. I've heard of that.
That's the nano that I know of.
Mm-hmm. And so with liposomal, it's all about how it's delivered. So it's about surrounding a molecule with fats. And when you do it, then the body processes it differently. So it's still, I think you're still making the molecule smaller. And this isn't my area of expertise. So I'm giving you my understanding of it. But please understand, I might have this a little bit wrong. But when the liposomal format, they're altering the chemical structure of it. So the way that it interacts with the body is different. And so it sounds really good. You hear liposomal vitamin C, it's more bioactive. It can do more, you can use more of the vitamin C that's in the tablet than you could have when it was in its old format. It sounds really good. It makes sense. It's like, ooh, well, this makes it better somehow. And I think it's, again, though, we're changing nature. We have a really great safety profile on the plant. When we start messing around with it, I don't know what we're going to have. I don't know what we're going to find.
So the thing is you're going to have people who mess with it. That's what I'm going to, no matter what. What I want is the education so that we know, yes, I agree with you. You don't want that. But here's where I think that like a good nano emulsifier, one that possibly uses more, like the one that I know of, I don't like it. I like using organic properties, but the reason I thought it might be a good product is for new users of cannabis who might use an edible and, you know, typically, oh, it's not working, I'm going to eat the whole thing. And then some reporter goes and writes, I almost died eating edibles.
Yeah.
And it's like, you did not listen to the package. It said to nibble on it. But anyway, a nano emulsifier, what's nice is it happens so much quicker. It's like a smoking. So I took a 24-hour tolerance break, and then I took one of these nano emulsifiers, and it worked within 10 minutes to me. And I was like, okay, I can see how that can help somebody not overdose if they're a new user of cannabis. That's the only real, like the only real value I saw to it, or someone just wanting to get messed up real fast.
Well, I mean,
but what I told him was
fast results though. Like not even about getting messed up. If I get a migraine, I want that pain to go away now. I don't want to wait an hour and a half for my oil to kick in. But I think
and then last for 4 or 5 hours.
But that's where I say again, I think for new consumers, I think go back to basics. And I know a lot of people don't like smoking and a lot of people don't want to. You can get sublingual tinctures in like an ethanol, you know, an alcohol based tincture. But I honestly, because I've had nurses come through my program who are completely cannabis naive. And I've had the question asked of me, well, do you think somebody can be a cannabis nurse if they don't use cannabis? And I'm like, yeah, doctors and nurses talk about medicines they don't use all the time. If doctors and nurses, if a requirement was that you have tried the medicine, I mean, like that just would be ridiculous, right? But I love
so every doctor needs to go through chemo if they want to administer chemo.
Right. Exactly. I mean, it doesn't make any sense that way. But like, I lost my train of thought. Hold on one sec.
I'm sorry. That's my fault.
No, it's okay. So I was going to say, shit, where was I? You can edit this part out where I'm like,
you're good. I will.
Shit, what was I going to say?
I'm very kind.
Good.
We were talking about the emulsifiers, the nano,
I know where I was going to say. Okay.
Okay.
So when somebody is new to cannabis, and I say the same thing to my nurses, I think, again, with my theme of going back to the basics, if you want to experience cannabis, the easiest, cheapest way to do that is to go out and buy a pre-roll joint, right? There's nothing that you have to set up for that. You don't have to have a pipe. You don't have to have a vaporizer. You don't even have to know how to roll a joint. If you have a dispensary and you want to experience cannabis, I think honestly the best way is to smoke, is to try it out, because you can cheaply buy.
I agree.
You can cheaply buy a pre-roll joint. You don't have to have any skills to know how to roll it. I can't roll a joint. Are you kidding me? Like if I was going to do joints, I would get the pre-rolled coins and stuff them with the little filter and the little like funnel and whatever, because all of those things can be complicated. And if you want to start with a vaporizer, if you want to use a vaporizer on the long term, I absolutely support that. I think vaporizers are great, but it's expensive. And if you go out and buy a vaporizer for your first time and it turns out you hate it, or you can't deal with the dry eyes or something else, if cannabis isn't right for you, then you've just wasted a ton of money when you could just go out. But people are afraid of smoking, and
that's the thing. So that's the thing about edibles is, sure, I understand what you're saying, but you can actually reach a lot more people with edibles than you can with smoking. And it's just, I mean, people being scared of drugs, people were scared of cigarettes too. And people will think if I'm smoking, that's going to be the same thing as smoking a cigarette. Even though it's the wrong way of thinking, there's a lot of people like that. There's other people who just don't want to smoke. But I've reached so many elderly people. I've reached judges. I couldn't ever say who they were, but I've reached judges. I've reached big people in society who said they would have never, ever been okay with cannabis. And I got them to eat some edibles and they love it now. Then they started smoking, but they would have never started if I would have offered them a smoke.
The issue with edibles, this is where I have a problem. So number one, I don't like edibles that are like baked goods. I want it to be something that you can portion, like, because if you're making it at home, fine. But if you go out and you buy a cookie or a pot brownie, you know, as we used to call them, this special brownie, you don't know where the medicine is in that brownie. You don't know if it's evenly distributed. So you could have this bite from this corner over here, and that could have all of the THC in it, or it could be nicely spread out. You don't know. So I hate baked good edibles. I'm all for like recreational enjoyment. I think we have the right to put in our bodies what we put in, but usually I refer to that as adult use. I'm very comfortable, so the word recreational slipped out. But I think that edibles should be THC is sufficient. And that is a tiny amount. If you get let's say you get a chocolate bar that's 10 milligrams, well, you know, you can kind of divide that up. But I'm like, if we're going to do edibles, I like nice square edibles that are easily dosed, because my one psychedelic cannabis experience, I actually heard colors and it was amazing, but it was not what I intended. It was because I had an edible that I got in DC, because it was before that. It was, you could purchase it in DC. Well, you couldn't purchase it. DC is weird. You couldn't purchase cannabis, but you can buy a sticker and they can give you cannabis as a free gift. It was a stupid loophole, but now they have some good dispensaries there, and you know, so that's a different situation. But I got this stupid gummy that was shaped like an octopus, and it was like 30 milligrams or something, which is way too much for me. I'm like, my happy dose was somewhere between 6 and 14 milligrams. So I got this stupid octopus gummy that I couldn't cut it evenly, right? And so I took way more than I needed, and I had a slightly scary experience, but I also knew, okay, this isn't going to kill me. I just have to ride it out. But I heard colors, and it was the most wild, like, and I did a psilocybin journey as well, you know, so like I have a little bit of other experience, but it was absolutely wild. And had I not known that cannabis was not going to kill me, I would have been terrified. You know, I was still kind of scared because it was way more than I was comfortable with. And so, because I know a lot of people, especially people that are older, that have slower metabolisms, because our metabolism slows as we get older, like 1.25 milligrams of THC might be plenty for somebody. So
you got to think about the other side of that spectrum as well, because like for me, the first time I took 5, nothing happened. Mm-hmm. Yep. And then the next day I took 20, nothing happened. The next day I took 50, nothing happened. I have found, for me, I need 200 to 500 milligrams for it to work for me.
Wow.
I know it sounds like a lot. My wife, 2 to 5 before she developed CHS. She actually, I think, developed because somebody gave us an edible, and he said it was 200 milligrams. She cut a little piece off for herself. I took it. I was fine. She went ballistic, and she has not been able to do cannabis ever since. But it's it shows the differences. But like for me, I don't know if it's my hyper anxiety, my PTSD, or if it's just the way I'm made. But yeah, edibles do. I've had a lot of people. They're like, everyone gets high off my edibles. I go, don't give me any, or I'm ruining your little experiment you're doing here, because I'm going to ruin it. Trust me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's the thing, dosing edibles and dosing oils, because oils, you dose the same way as edibles. I like oils because because I like to, I'm really specific. Some days I'm like, no, I only need 6 milligrams of THC. And other days I'm like, I'm in a lot of pain. I've got other stuff going on. I'm really stressed out. Maybe I need 14 or 15 milligrams. So I really like oils because I can customize it so specifically. But it is difficult to find your ideal dose of edibles. And I mean, I would never advise someone to experiment, like to go up quite so much as you did in those. Like,
yeah, don't. This is before I was. This is when I was like I smoked and tried to have fun with it. Mm-hmm. But now, even when I use it now, it needs to be a lot. But yeah, definitely, you want to talk to someone like her. You don't want to listen to me. This is just more of like. What I did was before people understood, or at least were okay to talk about it as what you would expect. And so,
well, yeah,
that, and it's, go ahead.
And and that's what happens is a lot of people you don't know. So you try things and you got lucky and it worked, and that's great. And but for other people, because see, the research says that doses over 30 milligrams of THC, can have, diminishing rewards, that typically for most people, more than 30 milligrams of THC at a time is too much. But what that doesn't account for is people who metabolize fats differently. So that's one thing I've noticed with patients who, and I've seen it with like IBS patients and patients who know that like, if they have too much cream or dairy or something that's fatty, that brings on self-titration, that you don't take another dose for at least 4 hours, because if your body is slow at metabolizing that, and like you said, that's what happens a lot of times to people with edible, and what makes it scary is because they'll take too much, or they'll take a double dose because it didn't kick in 45 minutes or whatever. And so they don't know how it's going to work with their body. So then they take too much, and then it's terrifying. You feel out of control. It can be really scary for people. But just because the research says that, over 30 milligrams is no longer therapeutic, says who? And it's a good way that's why I like smoking as well as an introductory method. And sometimes it takes a little education and people can come around to it once they understand you're not going to get lung cancer from this. Like, it might cause a little bit of airway irritation, but the fact that cannabis can be used for asthma because it's a bronchodilator. THC can dilate the airways so that if you're having an asthma attack and your airways are all constricted, THC can open those up. So who would think of smoking pot for an asthma attack? I mean, it doesn't make sense with what we've been taught. But then you can see, do I have a reaction to this? Because some people just don't have a reaction to it. So that's why I always say, if you're willing to start one pre-roll joint, even if, really, if you had one cigarette, would it likely kill you? Probably not.
And you don't want to smoke that whole joint if it's your first time.
Yeah,
do not.
You take
2 puffs and turn it off.
Yeah. So I would say 1 puff, and because this is what the research says too, 1 puff, wait 5 to 15 minutes, because it doesn't always affect you immediately. It can take 15 minutes, especially if it's just a little bit, and maybe it's just a tiny bit that you're feeling. But a lot of times people don't want to feel out of control. They don't know what they're getting into. And when you smoke it's out of your system, 45 minutes, an hour and a half, depending on how much you had, it's going to go away quickly. When I did my psilocybin journey, it was terrifying. Like, I was really sick. Psilocybin isn't normally a purgative, but for me, it had that effect. And I was miserable. And I did I did it in a therapeutic way. So I was working on my stuff, and I had, really good qualified sitters with me working through it all. And I did it as a therapeutic tool, but it was really unpleasant for me physically. And it lasted a long time. And I remember saying, like, When is this going to be over? Is there anything you can give me to help me get it out of my system faster? Like, and they were like, nope, you got to ride it out. They gave me a little bit of water, juice, something to, that was when
orange juice. That's what you want if you're throwing up.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Right. But that was when I realized that was the experience that made me realize that the plant medicine from the mint and the strawberry that were helping me in those moments, that was just as important and just as much a part of the medicine, but we don't think about it. And that's why, again, let's go back to the basics. Let's see how this works as a plant. See how it works for you smoking. One inhalation of something is not, I mean, there might be things that you inhale at once and you die, but one inhalation of cannabis, even if you don't like smoking, lets you get a sense of what it's about, what it might feel like. And then you can have that, because you can always add, if you take edibles and they don't work, right? But if you have some cannabis there that you can smoke or that you can vaporize, you can layer that on top of the edibles that didn't work. Like, you don't have to just, if you're brand new, maybe not, but if you start with smoking, then you can, it's that feedback that's so quick, right? You can figure it out quickly. You can go, yes, this is helping, or no, I don't like the way this feels and I want to stop. You can't do that with edibles. Edibles, you got to ride it out. The same with psilocybin. I had to ride that out. And I had great benefits from it. I'm a believer in plant medicine. I don't always think it's right for everybody. And I had incredible benefits from doing that. My energy was better. I felt really good for like 6 months. I have some chronic fatigue, and I didn't have that for 6 months, and it was amazing. And then it started to come back, and so it's like, probably I would need to do more of the high dose psilocybin or do microdosing or something like that. But that is not legally available where I live currently. So, I'm waiting, or you do, medical tourism where you go somewhere else to get what you can't get at home, right?
Do you know who Megan Bang is?
I don't know her personally. I've heard her name.
Okay. So she's told me, I don't know if this is true, but I believe she said that she can ship her products to the UK, and she does like tinctures, different types like that. Nothing that'll get you high or anything. She has very maybe 1 milligram of THC is the highest she has in it. Her thing is you need a little bit of THC in order for CBD or any other cannabinoid to work. If you need that CB1. Yeah. And so that's why she does, but she said that she's allowed to ship to the UK. And I was just wondering if that she's not like super cheap, but if, I was already talking to one lady, in the UK. She was in, she works for the marketing for a big company there. She has autism. We were talking about autism with cannabis before I talked to Bonnie Goldstein. But I'm just wondering if that would really help, because I was talking to her. I was like, I wonder if that would be more affordable, because she was telling me how expensive it is. And if anyone was wanting plant medicine that's not necessarily, to get you high, that might be one possibility. And if so, I would talk to her about giving people who used a discount from me, give them like a big discount in the UK as opposed to the United States. But that's just something I've always been thinking about. Yeah. I don't want to make money off of it. I'm not trying to say I want to try to make money. I want to try to get people the medicine where they are. Yeah, I think that there are a lot of great brands, actually. I have a really great CBD brand that I love. It comes out of Switzerland. It's all organic, and the carrier oils are as well. And you can get CBD here through like the medical cannabis program. I like the one that I get from Switzerland better because I know it's organic, and and we can get some decent stuff. It's just not as much variety. Like we don't have over here. I haven't seen anything come through yet with any of the so-called minor cannabinoids, like looking at CBG or CBG. Yep. CBG, I'd like to see some THCV. I think there are some other things that would be really great. Let me send you her link, okay? Because that's the specific things are THCV. The issues are importing and exporting, and that's where it gets tricky. So especially since this is my
this is my world of, it's the, sometimes it can be questionable is basically the thing. So I always try to stick with, what I can do legally. And I try to, and there are definitely products that you can get from the States. And I've had some others that I've looked at. I think it's just one of those things where there are some really good brands out there, and where you are, if you can get things, I'm a big believer in, what you can get locally as well. When you can find, but you have to know how to do the research on the brands. You have to understand what's really critically important. And so I think that's the,
So I've been approached by probably 50 or so companies wanting to use their product. I do not work with very many people. And the reason I do that is I don't like putting my name to something I don't know. I don't agree with, and I'm a prior extraction manager. I like to know how things are made. And that's one thing I got behind Megan is she does only ethanol extraction and only does organic products. She actually has moved away from different ones that were cheaper because they were not doing it organically.
Yeah. Well,
and that's what I really appreciated about her.
Yeah. You should talk to Jenna about it as well, because Jenna's done product formulations, and hers have won.
So Megan uses the same people Jana does, and that's how they all know each other. They all work. So Jarek is the one who makes it at Unity, and the Lighthearted Farmer, he actually just sent me stuff.
Yeah.
He's actually the one who helps formulate Megan Bang's products.
Yeah.
And so they're definitely they're a lot held to a lot higher standard. And Jana has attached her, what is it? CannabisNurseApproved.com. Yeah. So that's the reason why I got behind it. But she, just like you were saying, the ones I use have CBN, because I really liked what I've seen with CBN for the Alzheimer's, and with PTSD, I'm just wondering if it could help me in some way in my memory issues. And then, like you were saying, this other one I use is CBG and CBGA. It has 42 milligrams of CBG per 1 milliliter.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. There's so much. This is the thing that I think is exciting about cannabis. Like, I'm somebody who I'm really curious. And once I feel like I've mastered something, I'm ready to move on. Like, I'm really curious. I want to know. And then I want to know about the next thing. And then I want to know about the next thing. And what I think is really cool about cannabis is that there's so much for us to discover. And that's where I'm like, it is a discovery. There's so much there. There's so much that is, that we don't know yet. And the not knowing, while sometimes it can be frustrating, is also kind of exciting, because we know that this is a plant that humans have a good relationship with historically. Some individuals might not have a great relationship with it, but historically humans as a species have had a good relationship with cannabis. And so if we can, I don't want to be a broken record, but go back to the basics, like use the plant, let the plant teach us, connect with the plant, spend time thinking about it, looking at it. If you can, one of my sort of dream things that I want to do is I want to go to a giant field where they're growing and really look at the plants and interact with the plants and see how the bugs interact with the plants. There's so much there. And I think,
except for spider mites, they can go fuck themselves. Sorry for my language.
Fair enough. I'm not familiar with
spider mites. Oh, spider mites. They're little. They look like ants almost, and they create cobwebs all over everything. And as soon as they get infested, you gotta destroy every plant that has a spider mite on it.
Yeah. And
so they are the enemy of cannabis.
Yeah, it sounds like it would be. I just had visions in my head of burn the field.
Oh, I was in Afghanistan and had to watch poppy fields burn, which are some of the most beautiful flowers I've ever seen. It was just sad to watch them burn, and then have commanders say, "We're going to burn these guys as they say marijuana field." And I'm like, They got 6 plants. They're not funding the terrorists, okay? Let's not take away their medicine that they have back here. I mean, I fought against people saying I'm not destroying their marijuana. I'm not.
Yeah.
There's 6 plants. They're not creating a coalition against us with 6 plants.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, it's ridiculous how much they're like, because that's the whole thing is when you're destroying their crops, it's because they say they fund the terrorism with these crops, and sorry, 6 plants ain't funding shit.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
No, it's okay. It's a wild world we live in. I mean, you know, if we could all just learn to get along. I know I'm not the first one to say it, you know, but I think maybe if instead of having bars and pubs on every corner, if we had cannabis consumption lounges on every corner, like imagine how different society would be.
I would like to see pubs and cannabis right next to each other, and let's see the differences between them. Let's see how differently they interact with each other. That would actually be really great. Just keep cameras on it and see how the people interact. Let's see how much worse it is to be an alcoholic, which I have been, and it was disgusting and almost killed me, or cannabis, where it can enlighten you, help you to want to accept others, and want you to better yourself. That's the thing that cannabis, it makes you look in on yourself. It makes you think more about what's going on around you, and you go, okay, this is stuff I didn't think about. Maybe I'm wrong on this. Maybe I need to think a little bit harder.
One of the studies that Melanie Dreher, she was the one who did the studies on cannabis and pregnancy and children and everything. I mean, not cannabis and children, but cannabis and pregnancy and all of that. One of the things I remember from reading her research was that they basically in the culture that she was studying in Jamaica, it was that, and this is my understanding of her research. So with the understanding that I could have misunderstood, you know, or gotten something wrong, I'm not speaking for a culture here. But what I read in her research was that there were basically, it was a perception of women who smoked cannabis. And the idea was that there would be these gatherings and the men would smoke cannabis, and the word that she used in her report was reasoning. They referred to it as reasoning. So they would get together and have like philosophical conversations and things like that. And so the women who used cannabis for reasoning they called them roots daughters. They were like grounded in the sense of like realistic and pragmatic and connected to the earth. And so I really love that term for what cannabis allows us to do in many cases. That reasoning, it lets us think differently, and it lets us engage our philosophical side. And when we do that, when we look at people as being like us, you know, not different from us, then it does aid our reasoning, our abilities to see things in different ways. And I think it would be amazing if you had a pub and a cannabis consumption lounge, or a salon, or whatever you wanted to call it, or a cannabis pub. I would be much more comfortable in there. Even if you want to go in and take your edibles, but you want to hang out and you want to have philosophical conversations, I think it could be really life affirming.
They just need to be at dispensaries. They need to have them right next, where you can go buy if you want and leave, or you can go right through the door and go and enjoy. And that would be great, because a lot of people, you know, let's say you're traveling and you want to smoke, you might not be able to go smoke at your hotel. So you got a place. I think that's a great idea, and it's a great way for us to come together. Mm-hmm. And I digress.
That's where we started this whole day's conversation, was about, you know, the enjoyment and the social aspect and opening our minds. And I think I like to think about society and how, you know, is there a way that as humans we can all come together in a nicer way, in a more compassionate way, in a in a way that is wise rather than competitive or feeling like we have to one up the other person, and I think about what would society be like. And I think this is a really great thought exercise for anybody who's listening. What would society be like if everywhere you saw alcohol, instead there was cannabis? Yes, there would be people who have problems with it. Yes, there would be people for whom it's not ideal. But just think about, what would it be like instead of pubs on every corner? If it was, cannabis houses, cannabis lounges, it's a different way of being. And I think and this is where I asked you earlier, do you think all cannabis is medicinal? And I think even when it's being used in a recreational way, it's somebody who wants to relax. They want to get high. They want to feel giggly. They want their body to stop aching. They want that like stoned in the couch kind of feeling. Like,
someone with hyper anxiety, that's better than eroticism.
Healing. Yeah.
Oh, my legs do not stop. When I take an edible and my body stops, I just sit there and I go, oh my gosh, I don't have to tell myself to not move.
Yeah. What relief. And that's the amazing thing is because it also feels good. We don't think that it's real medicine.
Well, it's we because of pharmaceuticals, and I get it. You don't want to enjoy pharmaceuticals because guess what happens? You become a drug addict. That's what happened to me. I went from alcohol. The VA gave me benzodiazepines on top of benzodiazepines. I had Xanax, clonazepam, and trazodone all at the same time, 3-4 times a day,
and those
a lot of it
can cause brain injuries in patients. We know if you look up benzodiazepine, like adverse effects, they're given out like candy, and they can.
I've seen somebody say this guy's had Xanax for 15 years and he's like, really, he doesn't need it anymore. But if I stop giving it to him, he'd die. And that's because they say that withdrawals from benzodiazepines, if it's been too long, is too detrimental to your body. It's worse than opiate withdrawals.
I know somebody who was put on Klonopin, which was not the right medicine for him anyway. But in order to wean off of it, it took over 500 days of agonizing tinnitus that was so bad that he couldn't sleep. He couldn't go out in public. He couldn't function. I mean, I have seen like the drugs that just because everybody else is fine, if you're the one person that has a really bad reaction to it, and most of those people, they're not the only one person, but we're comfortable with those risks. We're not comfortable with the perceived risks of cannabis as a culture yet, but it's all a myth. It's a complete smokescreen.
Well, how about this? How do we get rid of cancer? We are okay with administering poison to get rid of poison.
Yep.
And how many people do we hear that switch to a what is it? Herbalist diet,
alkaline diet,
and went to and they went right good. And it doesn't even mean that you have to stop using meat. Just means you have to use grass-fed meat and not what they're using. Anyway, there's so much that can be benefited from that. And what I tell people is I'm A-okay with people using cannabis whenever they want, but I think that the goal for medicinal cannabis is to get better. And so I don't want people to have to use cannabis for the rest of their lives. If they want to, have fun. But I don't think you should have to use that.
Yeah.
The goal is to heal. And that's where a lot of people think that it's fake. It's just everyone just wants to have fun. No, you can heal. You can heal with cannabis.
But people say, how can it fix everything? People say it fixes everything. It must be a snake oil. It's a panacea. It can't be real. But again,
no,
it's because we're
it
dealing
can't
with
fix
the
everything.
master.
It can fix a lot, but it's not going to fix your broken leg. I'm telling you that. And it's not going to take all the pain away, but it will make it more bearable. And that's something that can really help. If you don't want to take a pain med and become a drug addict, you could be like, okay, I'm going to feel pain, but I'm going to make it more manageable. And that's where like a strong edible can really help out. But that's really where you only want a strong edible, is if you're really wanting to disassociate yourself from pain. That's, in my opinion, that's what a real strong edible or a concentrate, which I hate, but I can see that really helping with a really bad pain. Just really ripping on a dab and then, okay, for the next 30 minutes, I'm not going to feel this pain. That I can see.
So when I was in nursing school, what's called a preceptorship. And it's where you go out into the world, into the community. You're with a mentor who's actually a working nurse, as opposed to your instructors who are working, at the university or the college or whatever it is. So you go out for your preceptorship. And my preceptorship was in a pediatric hospice. And it was an incredibly powerful experience for me. I wasn't like, I was just there for a semester. We didn't lose any patients in that time, which was great. And with pediatric hospice, it's not always a terminal diagnosis, but they look at a life-limiting or life-limiting illness could also qualify a child for hospice. But when you have somebody that's in severe pain, the amount of opioids that some of these kids were getting, and that was what they needed for their pain relief. So, and if you're not so worried about if somebody's in pain, if they've got a terminal diagnosis, you're not really worried about how much morphine they're getting on their IV drip, within the bounds of safety, of course. But with opioids, you just keep going up because patients tend to need more. And the risk and reward, quality of life, all of those things are taken into consideration. And there are some times that we really do need strong medicines, whether it's a strong edible, whether it's a strong opioid. There are times that we need all of these different things. So if we can be really clear and honest with ourselves, if we can get rid of the myths and the stigmas and the false facts that we've been led, the things that we believed that are completely erroneous. If we can get rid of those things, then we can use the medicine that is all around us, the medicine that's available. We can use the plants, and I don't know.
I just want people to have the ability to use a plant to medicate themselves if they want to. It's so erroneous to not. And you know what? Have all your pharmaceuticals, have at it. Yeah. If somebody wants to do that to themselves, do it. And you know what? There's a lot of things that can help. Like you said, if I got half my body blown off, I don't think cannabis is really going to do it for me. I would like something really strong, but you want people to have the ability and the option. And guess what? If everyone had the ability to grow the plant themselves, they wouldn't. Everyone has the ability to grow their own food. Yeah. We understand how healthy it is, and we don't, because it's a lot of work and nobody wants to do it. And so they have these, we won't make money if we legalize. Everyone will grow their own. No, maybe they'll try. It's not easy. It is not easy to grow cannabis and do it right and make it taste good and actually want to use it. Oh my gosh, it's hard. Yeah. It is a science. And so trust me, 90% of people are going to go, yeah, fuck this.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. There are plenty of things that we could do ourselves that we don't. And I think I absolutely agree with you. It's about people having options. It's about people having choices, having safe choices, because the illicit cannabis that you've got to go buy from the guy behind the 7-Eleven or whatever, who knows?
I'd much rather go to a farm, like a farmer's market of a bunch of local growers because guess what? They're going to be trying to make sure it's a good product. If they're going against other growers, they're not going to be like, well, I'm going to get by with this Mexican ditch I just put, fentanyl on. That's ugh. And that's the thing is everyone's like, oh, we shouldn't legalize cannabis because there's fentanyl. It's like, well, do you think they get on legal cannabis or illegal cannabis, dumbass?
The studies really have shown pretty unequivocally that legalization protects kids. It protects people from.
Oh no. Did you hear the cartel is putting their cannabis in legal market? So we're really propping up the cartels now. That's what Florida says.
Yeah. I mean, everyone's got opinions, and you know what they say about those.
Gosh. they're like buttholes.
Yes.
Everyone's got one and they all stink.
And now you've just had so much time listening to our opinions, but opinions based on fact and research and study, long study.
And I learned that very medical fact from Squidbillies on Adult Swim, so everybody knows. All right. Well, I want to keep talking. I just realized we're about at the 4-hour mark. So I'm going to go ahead and call it today. But trust me, we're going to have Ariana back. This has been such a great conversation. And I knew it was going to be. Did not know it was going to go this long, but that is A-okay. Now, I will say thank you for coming out.
Thank you so much
thank you for joining us.
Of course. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm jumping in too. Thanks so much for having me. it's such a pleasure and it's such a joy to be able to share with you, with your audience. And I'm absolutely really just happy to be able to be part of the conversation. So
thank you. And I'm glad you are too. It's very wonderful to talk to. I have not gone this far. I thought 2.5 hours was long already. So definitely a great conversation. Now, as always, Jay is going to go smoke a J.